Welcome back to the quiet apothecary. Take a slow breath, settle into where you are, and let the shoulders soften a little. There is no hurry tonight, and nothing here that asks anything of you. Tonight we begin a long way from here, in a city by the sea that is mostly gone now, and yet has never quite left us. Tonight we begin in old Alexandria, in Egypt, on the shore of the warm Mediterranean, in the slow gold light of a long evening many centuries ago. Imagine for a moment that the long day is ending. The sun has gone low over the water to the west, and the whole great harbor has turned the soft color of warmed honey. The white stone of the city has turned faintly amber. The masts of the moored ships stand still against the calm of the evening. And far out upon the island that guards the harbor, on the long low spit of rock the old Greeks called Pharos, the great lighthouse has just been lit, and a small steady point of fire now burns at the top of the tallest tower in all the known world, throwing its long slow gleam out across the darkening sea. We are standing at the door of a small shop. It is a narrow shop, set back a little from the busy quay, in a quiet lane that runs up from the eastern harbor toward the wide colonnaded street at the heart of the city. The door is low and painted a soft faded blue, the color of old water, and above it hangs a small clay lamp on an iron hook, just now being lit by a thin taper. Inside, the air is warm and still, and full of 100 soft fragrances at once. There is the dry, sweet smell of old resin, and the green smell of dried herbs, and the warm, earthy smell of ground roots, and beneath all of it, faint and steady, the smell of beeswax and of lamp oil and of old cedar wood. This is the shop of an apothecary, a maker of medicines, a keeper of the cupboard, and it is here, at this low blue door, in this quiet lane above the harbor, that I would like to spend the whole of this long, slow evening with you. We will go inside in a moment. We will walk slowly along the shelves and look at the jars and open the lids and take down the dried roots and the resins and the powders one at a time, and I will tell you, as the old apothecary would have told a young apprentice on just such an evening, what each one was, and where it came from, and what it was for, and the long road it traveled to reach this quiet shelf above the sea. And as we go, we will let the whole great history of this strange and wonderful city rise up softly around us, the way the steam rises from a warm cup. For this was no ordinary city, and this was no ordinary shop. This was Alexandria, the crossroads of the whole ancient world, the place where the medicine of Egypt and the medicine of Greece and the medicine of India and Arabia and all the lands around the warm Middle Sea came together on one set of shelves, in one warm room by one small steady lamp. That is the pace I would like to keep tonight. Slow, even, steady as the slow lap of the harbor water against the old stone of the quay. There is nothing here that asks for hurry. There will be no quiz at the end. You do not need to remember any of the names, nor any of the dates, nor any of the long words. You may let every one of them drift past you like the slow warm steam from the cup, like the slow gleam of the far lighthouse moving out across the dark water. Let your eyes close whenever they wish to close. Let the body grow heavy and warm and quiet at its own slow pace. I am only going to talk softly for a long while about a small shop by a harbor that is gone, and the medicines upon its shelves, and the long, slow history that gathered there. And if you fall asleep long before we reach the end, then that is exactly as it should be. and the shop will keep, and the lamp will keep, and the slow gleam of the far lighthouse will keep moving out across the dark water until the morning comes. So, let us push open the low blue door and step inside, out of the soft gold of the evening, into the warm still air and the soft yellow lamplight of the apothecary's shop above the harbour of old Alexandria. Before we begin to open the jars, though, let us pause a moment on the threshold and look around us and understand a little of where we are and how this strange and wonderful city came to be. For the shop did not stand alone. It stood at the heart of one of the most remarkable cities the world has ever made. And to understand the shells, we must first understand the city. And to understand the city, we must go back a little, to the very beginning, to the day the city was first dreamed. The city of Alexandria was founded, the old histories tell us, in the year 331 before the Common Era, by the young Macedonian King Alexander, whom the later ages would call Alexander the Great. He was a young man then, not yet 25 years of age, and he had come down into Egypt with his armies. And the old land of the pharaohs had received him almost gladly, for the people were wary of their foreign rulers, and the young king had a gift for being welcomed. And he stood one day, the story goes, upon a low strip of land between the warm sea and a wide, quiet lake, where a small fishing village had stood for longer than anyone could say. And he looked at the place, and he saw what no one else had seen. He saw a great city. He saw a harbour that could hold 1,000 ships. He saw the meeting place of two worlds, the world of the sea and the world of the river, the world of Greece and the world of Egypt. And he marked out the lines of the streets, so the story goes, with a trail of barley meal, for he had no chalk to hand, and when the birds came down and ate the barley, his seers told him that the city he was founding would feed the whole world. He named it after himself, Alexandria, and then he rode away east to his wars and his far conquests, and he never saw the city built. He died a few years later, far away, a young man still, and his body was brought back, in the end, to lie in the city that bore his name. But by then he had left the building of it to others, and it is those others, and what they made, that concerns us tonight. For when Alexander died, his great empire was divided among his generals, and the rich prize of Egypt fell to a shrewd and careful man named Ptolemy, a boyhood friend of the dead king, who made himself the first king of a new line that would rule Egypt for nearly 300 years. The Greeks called this line the Ptolemies, and they were a strange and brilliant, and often terrible family, full of poisonings and marriages between brother and sister. And they ruled from Alexandria, and they poured the wealth of all Egypt into the making of it. And the thing they wanted, more than anything, more even than gold or armies, was to make their city the center of the whole world's learning. They wanted to gather into one place, by the warm harbor, all the knowledge of all the peoples of the earth. And so they built two things that would change the history of the world. The first was a great house of study, which they called the Mauseon, the house of the Muses, the place from which our own word museum comes down to us, though the thing they built was less like our quiet museums and more like a great living school, a place where the wisest men and women of the age were gathered, and given rooms, and given meals at a common table, and given salaries from the king's own treasury, and given nothing to do but to think, and to study, and to teach, and to argue, and to write. Mathematicians live there, and astronomers, and geographers, and poets, and engineers, and above all for our purposes tonight, physicians. The men who studied the body, and the men who studied the plants that healed it, walked together in the shaded colonnades of the Malson, and ate together at the common table, and shared what they learned. And the second thing the Ptolemies built, beside the Mosion, was the library. The great library of Alexandria, the most famous gathering of books the ancient world ever made, which set out, with a kind of beautiful and impossible ambition, to gather a copy of every book ever written, in every language of the world. The way they filled the library tells you much about the spirit of the place. Every ship that came into the harbor of Alexandria, the law said, must hand over any books it carried, so that the scribes of the library might copy them. The originals often were kept by the library, and the copies handed back to the owners, who were not always pleased. The kings sent agents out across the whole known world to buy books, and to borrow books, and now and then to steal books. One of the Ptolemies, the histories say, borrowed the precious official copies of the great Athenian playwrights from the city of Athens, leaving an enormous sum of silver as a deposit, and then simply kept the originals and sent back copies, and let the silver go, for the books were worth more to him than all the silver in Egypt. At its height, the library is said to have held hundreds of thousands of scrolls, perhaps more, though no one truly knows the number, and no one ever will. And among all those countless scrolls, on the shelves of one quiet wing of the great library, were the medical books, the works of the old Greek physicians and the old Egyptian healers, and the careful records of which plant cured which ailment, gathered from every land the ships could reach. So you begin to see, perhaps, why the medicine of Alexandria became something the world had never seen before. Here was a city built where the river met the sea, where the caravans of the desert met the ships of the ocean. Here was a harbor into which came the grain of Egypt, and the resins of Arabia, and the spices of India, and the herbs of Greece, and the strange roots of farther lands still. And here, beside the harbor, was a great house of learning and a great library, where the physicians could study, side by side, every healing tradition the ships and the caravans brought in. Egyptian medicine, which was very old indeed, older than almost anything, with its careful recipes written on papyrus 1,000 years before. Greek medicine, with its careful watching of the sick, and its theories of the four humours of the body. And, flowing in through the harbour from the south, and from the east, the drugs and the herbs and the resins of half the world. All of it gathered, all of it studied, all of it set down in writing, all of it ground and weighed and compounded into medicines, in the warm rooms of the apothecaries of the city by the sea. And this is the city in which our small shop stands. This is the lane, above the eastern harbour, in which our low blue door is set. The apothecary whose shelves we are about to walk along was a small man in a great city, one of many hundreds who made and sold medicines in the streets of Alexandria. But his cupboard, his small warm room full of jars, was a kind of mirror of the whole great city around it. For everything that came into the harbour found its way, sooner or later, onto a shelf like his. The frankincense of Arabia, the pepper of India, the poppy of the fields, the strange compound antidotes brewed against the poisons of kings, the careful books of the great physicians copied out by the scribes of the library. All of it gathered, in small clay jars, in one warm room, by one small steady lamp, above the slow lap of the harbour water. Let me tell you, before we begin, how the shop is laid out, so that you may see it in your mind as we walk, and so that the walking may be slow and easy and need no hurry. As you come in at the low blue door, the room opens out before you, long and narrow and warm. Down the whole of the left-hand wall runs a long shelf of plain clay jars, the common cupboard, the everyday medicines that the apothecary reached for 100 times a day. Further in, on the right, stands a tall cabinet of cedar wood, with small drawers and small doors, and here are kept the precious things, the resins and the spices that came in by the long roads from the south and the east, each one worth more than its weight in silver. In the middle of the room stands the long compounding bench, worn smooth and pale by the years, scattered with mortars and pestles and small bronze scales and little horn spoons, where the apothecary did the slow, careful work of grinding and weighing and mixing. At the back of the room, behind a soft hanging curtain, is a small inner room where a scribe sits at a low table, copying out recipes by the light of a second lamp, for in a shop such as this the keeping of the written recipes mattered almost as much as the keeping of the herbs themselves. And at the very back, a small door opens onto a tiny walled yard where a few medicinal plants grow in clay pots and where a brazier burns low for the slow simmering of the decoctions, and from which, if you stand quite still, you can hear the slow lap of the harbour water against the stone of the quay, just beyond the wall. That is the shop. That is where we will spend the night. Let us begin slowly at the nearest shelf, the long shelf of plain clay jars down the left-hand wall, the common cupboard of the everyday medicines, and let us take them down one at a time and see what they were. The first jar the apothecary reaches for, on most ordinary mornings, is the one nearest his hand at the end of the long shelf, and inside it are the dried silver-grey leaves of wormwood. The Greeks called the plant absinthium, and the Romans called it absinthium, and from that old word comes our own English name for the bitter drink that was later made from it, though tonight we are far older than any such drink. Wormwood was in the cupboard of the ancient apothecary, one of the great everyday bitter medicines, the kind of plant that a healer reached for again and again for so many small troubles of the body. The plant itself grows wild and hardy on the dry stony hillsides all around the Mediterranean, a low silvery bush with soft feathery leaves and a smell that is sharp and clean and unmistakable, and a taste. When you put the smallest leaf upon the tongue, that is among the most bitter of all the bitter things that grow. The apothecary dried the leaves and the soft flowering tops in the shade, and stored them in the plain clay jar, and a small pinch was steeped in warm water, or in a little warmed wine, to make a bitter draught for a sour and heavy stomach, for a body that would not take its food, for the slow, stubborn worms that troubled the children of the poorer quarters of the city. It was a plain medicine and a common one, and it sat at the end of the shelf because the apothecary reached for it so often. Beside the wormwood stands a jar of mallow. Now mallow is the gentlest of plants, the soft kind cousin of the harsh wormwood, and where the wormwood is bitter, the mallow is soft and slippery and soothing. It is a low, spreading plant with soft, rounded leaves and small pale pink flowers, and it grows everywhere, in the waste ground, and along the field edges, and in the cracks of the old walls, so that it cost nothing at all, and the poorest woman of the city could gather it for herself. When the leaves and the roots of the mallow are steeped in warm water, they give up a soft, clear slipperiness, a kind of gentle thickening of the water, and it was this soft slipperiness that the apothecary valued. He gave warm mallow water for a sore and raw throat, for a dry, hard cough, for the inner soreness of the body, for the slow easing of all the dry and inflamed places. He laid warm mallow leaves, softened in hot water, upon a swelling or a sore, to draw out the heat and ease the ache. It was the great softening, soothing, gentling medicine of the everyday cupboard, and a kind of plainness and kindness seems to gather around it even now. Next along the shelf is the fennel, with its tall, hollow stems, and its soft feathery green, and its small ribbed seeds that smell so sweetly of warm licorice and aniseed. Fennel grew all along the dry roadsides of Egypt and Greece alike, tall and golden in the high summer, and the apothecary kept both the seeds and the dried root. The seeds, chewed slowly, or steeped in warm water, were the great old remedy for the troubled and windy stomach, for the slow, uneasy digestion after a heavy meal, for the colic of the small, fretful baby that would not settle in the long night. A warm cup of fennel water, the mothers of the old city believed, would quiet a crying child and ease the small clenched belly, and there is a soft truth in it, for the warm, sweet water does soothe and settle, and the mothers were not wrong. The Greeks had a high regard for fennel, and an old story too. For they said that the very name of the plant, Marathon in the Old Greek, was the name of the famous field of the great battle, the field where the wild fennel grew, and that the long-distance run we still call, by that name carries the soft green memory of the plant in its very word. Then there is coriander, whose round pale seeds smell warm and sweet, and a little of orange peel, and whose fresh green leaves the cooks of the city threw into every dish. The apothecary kept the dried seeds for the settling of the stomach, and the sweetening of the breath, and the cooling of a body too full of heat. And beside it the cumin, whose small dark seeds, warm and earthy and a little sharp, were among the most common things in any kitchen and any cupboard of the whole ancient world, ground into the bread and the stews of every household, and kept by the apothecary for the windy belly and the slow cold digestion. These two, the coriander and the cumin, were so common, so cheap, so much a part of the daily life of every house, that we might pass them by without a thought, and yet they were among the oldest medicines of all, named in the careful Egyptian papyri 1,000 years, and more before our apothecary was ever born, ground in the very same way, kept for the very same troubles, and then set a little apart, in a wider jar with a close-fitting lid, is the honey. We may not think of honey as a medicine, and yet in the cupboard of the ancient apothecary, it was perhaps the single most important thing upon the whole long shelf. The honey of Egypt was famous, gathered from the hives along the green banks of the great river, thick and dark and sweet, and it was used in more medicines than almost anything else. For honey the old healers knew, though they did not know why, would keep a wound clean, spread upon a cut, or a burn, or a sore that would not heal. The thick, sweet honey kept the badness away, and let the flesh knit clean beneath it. And this we now understand, For the honey draws the water out of the small creatures of decay, and will not let them live. But the apothecary did not need to understand it. He only needed to know that it worked, and he had known it. His whole tradition had known it, for longer than the city itself had stood. And beyond the healing of wounds, the honey was the great sweetener and the great binder of the whole cupboard, for it was honey that the bitter medicines were mixed into, to make them bearable upon the tongue. And it was honey that held the powders together into the small soft lozenges and the thick dark electuaries that we shall come to later in the night. Beside the honey stands the beeswax, pale gold and faintly sweet smelling, the gift of the same patient bees. The apothecary melted the beeswax gently and stirred into it the oils and the resins and the powdered herbs, and so made the soft healing salves and ointments that he spread upon the skin, the soothing balms for the dry and cracked places, the cooling creams for the burns of the summer sun, the thick dark plasters for the aching joints of the old. Wax and oil and honey, these three, were the great soft foundations of the cupboard, the things into which everything else was folded, and they sat together near the middle of the long shelf, close to the apothecary's hand. And at the very end of the shelf, in a plain wide jar, is a heap of soft white crystalline powder, and this is the natron, and it is the most Egyptian thing on the whole shelf, the thing that ties our small shop most deeply to the ancient land in which it stands. Natron is a natural salt, a soft white mineral that the Egyptians gathered from the dry shores of certain bitter lakes out in the western desert, where the burning sun had drawn the water away and left the white salt crusted upon the mud. It was a great cleansing and drying thing. The Egyptians had used it for thousands of years, in the careful preparing of the bodies of the dead, the long, slow art we now call mummification, for the natron drew all the moisture from the body and kept it from decay. But in the apothecary's everyday cupboard, it had gentler uses. A little natron dissolved in water made a cleansing wash for the mouth and the teeth, and a drying powder for the damp and sweating skin, and a soft cleaning agent for 100 small tasks. It was cheap, for the desert gave it freely, and it was useful, and it was very, very old, and it smelled faintly of the dry white desert from which it came. There, that is the common cupboard, the nearest shelf, the everyday medicines. Wormwood for the bitter cure, mallow for the soft soothing, fennel and coriander and cumin for the troubled belly, honey and wax for the wounds and the salves, natron for the cleansing. These were the plain things, the cheap things, the things the poorer people of the city could afford, the things the apothecary reached for 100 times a day, on 100 ordinary days, by the soft light of his small lamp. They are humble, perhaps, and we have walked along them slowly. But the shelf grows more precious as we move along it, and the jars grow smaller, and the lids grow tighter, for now we come to the part of the cupboard where the costly things are kept, the things that came up from the far south by the long camel roads, the resins worth more than silver. Let us turn now to those. There is, on the right-hand side of the room, set a little above the common shelf, a smaller cabinet of cedar wood, and its doors are kept closed, for the things within it are precious. When the apothecary opens those doors, the whole room fills at once with a deep, sweet, resinous fragrance, warm and golden, and a little smoky, the smell that the ancient world loved above all other smells. the smell of the temple and the sick room and the embalmer's table alike. For inside this cabinet are kept the great aromatic resins of the south, the frankincense, and the myrrh and the precious balsams, the dried tears of certain small thorny trees that grow only in the hot, dry lands at the far southern edge of the Arabian desert and across the narrow sea in the Horn of Africa, in the lands the old geographers called Arabia Felix, which means the happy Arabia, or the fortunate Arabia, the green and fragrant corner of that great burning waste. Let us take down the frankincense first. The apothecary lifts out a small linen bag and loosens its mouth, and within are the soft golden lumps of the dried resin, some of them clear as amber, some of them pale and milky, each one a single hardened tear that wept long ago from a wound in the bark of the frankincense tree. The tree itself is a small, gnarled, thorny thing, no taller than a man, that clings to the dry rocky hillsides of the far south, and the gatherers cut small wounds into its silvery bark, and the tree weeps a soft white sap from the wound, and the sap hardens slowly in the burning sun into these golden tears, and the gatherers come back weeks later and collect them. It is slow and patient work in a hard and burning land, and the frankincense was costly in proportion, worth, in the markets of the ancient world, a price near that of gold itself. When you set a small lump of frankincense upon a hot coal, it does not so much burn as melt and smoke, and it gives off a thick, sweet white smoke, fragrant and resinous and clean, that rises in slow curls toward the ceiling and fills the whole room with its golden fragrance. And it was this smoke, above all, that the ancient world prized. It was burned in vast quantities upon the altars of every temple, from Egypt to Greece to Rome, for the rising fragrant smoke was felt to carry the prayers of men upward toward the gods. But the apothecary valued the frankincense for more than its smoke. He ground the golden tears to a powder and mixed the powder into his salves and his plasters. For the frankincense, he knew, would soothe an inflamed place and help a wound to close clean and ease the slow ache of a swollen joint. He gave it for troubles of the chest and the breathing, and for the slow inner soreness of the body, and the smoke of it, breathed in, was thought to clear and calm the troubled head. It was a medicine and an incense and a luxury all at once, and it had come, every golden tear of it, by a journey of many hundreds of miles, up the long incense roads of Arabia, on the backs of the patient camels, across the burning waste, to reach at last this small cedar cabinet in a quiet shop above the harbor of Alexandria. And beside the frankincense, in another small linen bag, is the mirror, its dark and serious sister. Where the frankincense is golden and sweet, the mirror is reddish-brown and bitter, and its fragrance is deeper and sadder and more complex, a warm, bitter, resinous smell with something almost mournful folded into it. It too is the dried tear of a small, thorny tree of the far south, gathered in the same slow, patient way, and it too traveled the long incense roads to reach the markets of the world. The myrrh was, if anything, even more prized than the frankincense as a medicine, for the bitter resin was a great healer of wounds. The apothecary dissolved it in wine, or ground it into his salves, and laid it upon the deep cuts and the sores that would not close, and the mirror cleaned them and helped them heal. It was used to wash and to dress the most serious wounds, and it was used, mixed with other things, in the careful art of preserving the bodies of the dead. For the same drying and cleansing power that healed the living also preserved the dead, and the embalmers of Egypt prized the myrrh as highly as the apothecaries did. There is, in the deep bitter fragrance of the myrrh, something that has gathered to it, across the long centuries, all the gravity of the sick room and the deathbed and the temple, and the apothecary handled it always with a kind of quiet respect. There were other precious things in this small cedar cabinet too. There was the balsam, the rare and famous balm that came from a small grove of trees near the far southern shores, the most precious aromatic oil of the whole ancient world, so costly that it was kept in tiny vials and given out a single drop at a time, prized for the healing of wounds and the soothing of the skin and the slow easing of the inner troubles of the body. And there was bdellium, a softer, cheaper cousin of the myrrh, a brownish fragrant gum used in much the same way, for the salves and the plasters and the slow healing of the sores. The whole small cabinet, when its door stood open, was a treasury of the far south, a gathering of the slow patient gifts of the thorny trees of the burning desert, brought up by the camel roads to this quiet shelf by the sea. And the apothecary, lifting out his small linen bags by the soft light of his lamp, was holding in his hands the distilled fragrance of half a continent, the golden tears wept by the trees of a land he would never see. But the south was not the only road that fed his cupboard. There was another road, far longer, far stranger, that came in not by camel across the desert, but by ship across the open ocean, all the way from the spice lands of distant India. And it is to that long sea road, and the small jars of eastern spices it filled, that we must turn next. There is, on the highest shelf of the cedar cabinet, a row of very small jars, the smallest in the whole shop, each one stoppered tight with a plug of wax and cork, and these hold the spices of the East, the rarest and most travelled things in the entire cupboard. To understand them, you must understand the long road they came by, for it was one of the great wonders of the ancient world, and it is a thing worth lingering over slowly in the warm quiet of the night. The spices of the East came from India, and from the islands beyond India, lands so far away that to the people of Alexandria they were almost the edge of the world, half real and half a dream. And for a long time, the way they came was slow and roundabout and dear, passing from hand to hand along the caravan roads, each merchant taking his share, so that, by the time a peppercorn reached the markets of the Mediterranean, it had passed through a dozen pairs of hands and travelled across half the earth, and cost accordingly. But in the days of our apothecary, in the long centuries when Alexandria was at its height, a great secret had been learned, a secret that changed everything, and it concerned the wind. For the sailors of the Red Sea ports had learned the rhythm of the monsoon. They had learned that the great winds of the Indian Ocean blow steadily in one direction for half the year, and then, with the turning of the seasons, reverse and blow steadily back the other way for the other half. And this meant that a ship could leave the Egyptian shore of the Red Sea in the summer and let the great wind carry it straight out across the open ocean, all the way to the shores of India, in a single bold crossing, far out of sight of any land for many days, trusting only to the wind and the stars. And then, having traded for its precious cargo, the ship could wait for the turning of the season and let the great wind, now blowing the other way, carry it straight home again. It was a daring and a frightening thing to sail out into the open ocean with no land in sight, and many ships were surely lost, but the reward was enormous. For a ship that made the crossing and came safely home brought back a cargo worth a fortune, and the merchants who fitted out such ships in the Red Sea ports grew very rich indeed. The ships left from two great ports on the Egyptian shore of the Red Sea, ports with the old names of Berenice and Myos Hormos, which means the harbour of the mussel. From these ports the merchants set out across the Eastern Sea, and we know a great deal about their voyages because a sailor of those days, whose name we do not know, wrote down a careful account of the whole route, a kind of guidebook to the trade, which has come down to us across all the centuries, and which we call the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea. The sailing around of the Red Sea, though it describes a route that reaches far beyond the Red Sea, all the way to the markets of India and the spice coasts beyond. It tells what each port along the way would buy and what each port would sell, in plain practical words, the way a working sailor would want to know them, and through its plain words we can almost feel the long voyages, the loading of the ships, the haggling in the far markets, the long anxious crossing of the open sea. And what did the ships bring home to fill these smallest jars upon the highest shelf? They brought, first of all, the pepper. The black pepper of the Malabar coast of southern India, the small, wrinkled, dark berries that we still grind upon our food today, were among the most prized and the most profitable cargoes of the whole Eastern trade. The ancient world loved pepper with a kind of passion, and used it in vast quantities, in the cooking of the rich and in the medicine of the apothecary alike, for pepper was thought to be warming and drying and strengthening, a great help for the cold, sluggish stomach and the slow, heavy digestion, a stirring up of the body's inner heat. The apothecary kept his pepper in a small tight jar and ground it fresh, a few berries at a time, for it was far too precious to grind in advance and let its fragrance fade. And every one of those small wrinkled berries had crossed the whole width of the Indian Ocean and the whole length of the Red Sea and the desert road beyond, to reach this quiet shelf above the harbour. Beside the pepper stand the cinnamon and the cassia, the sweet, fragrant inner bark of certain trees of the Far East, peeled in long curling quills and dried, warm and sweet and faintly woody upon the tongue. The ancient world was a little confused about where exactly the cinnamon came from, and the merchants who sold it were happy to keep them confused, telling strange, wonderful tales of the great birds that gathered the cinnamon sticks for their nests upon high cliffs, tales designed to keep the true source secret and the price high. But the apothecary cared less for where it came from than for what it did, and he prized the cinnamon greatly for the warming of the cold body, for the settling of the stomach, for the sweetening of his medicines, and for the deep, warm fragrance it lent to the precious compound remedies that we shall come to later in the night. Then there is the cardamom, the small pale pods full of dark, fragrant seeds, sweet and sharp, and a little camphorous, prized for the breath and the digestion, and the costus, a fragrant root from the high mountains of the far north of India, warm and earthy, used in the salves and the incenses and the warming medicines. And most precious of all the Eastern things, there is the nard, the spikenard, a rare and costly fragrant oil pressed from the root of a small plant that grows only high in the cold mountains beyond India, in the great mountains we now call the Himalaya. The spikenard was among the most precious substances in the entire ancient world, an oil of a deep, warm, earthy fragrance, kept in tiny sealed alabaster jars and given out a single drop at a time, used to anoint the heads of kings and to perfume the most precious of ointments and to soothe the gravest troubles of the body. To open the tiny jar of spikenard was to release a fragrance that had traveled from the roof of the world, across the mountains and the plains and the oceans, by a road so long that the mind can hardly hold it. And there, on the highest shelf, in the smallest jars, sits the whole Far East, gathered and stoppered and waiting. Pepper from the Malabar coast, cinnamon from the Spice Islands, cardamom and costus and nard from the mountains and the plains of India. Each one a tiny thing, a single berry or a curl of bark or a drop of oil, and each one the end of a journey so long and so dangerous that we can scarcely believe it was made at all, made again and again, year after year, by the brave anonymous sailors of the Red Sea ports, who trusted their lives to the great turning winds of the Eastern Ocean. The apothecary, weighing out a few peppercorns on his small bronze scale by the light of his lamp, held in the balance the whole width of the known world. But we have spent a long while now among the jars and the shelves, among the herbs and the resins and the spices, the things of the cupboard. And a cupboard, however rich, is only half of an apothecary's world. The other half is the knowledge of the body itself, the understanding of what the medicines were for, the long careful study of how the living body is made, and how it works and how it fails. And in this, too, Alexandria was the wonder of the ancient world, for here, in the warm rooms of the Mausoleum, beside the great library, certain physicians did a thing that had never quite been done before, and would not be done again for many centuries after. They studied the body itself, carefully and directly, and they learned things about it that no one had ever known. So let us leave the cupboard for a while, and let us speak, softly and slowly, of the great physicians of Alexandria, and of the strange and remarkable things they came to understand. Let us begin with the greatest of them, the one they would later call the father of anatomy, a careful, patient, watchful man named Herophilus. Herophilus was a Greek born across the sea in a city called Chalcedon, on the Asian shore opposite the place where the great city of Constantinople would one day stand. And he came to Alexandria as a young man, drawn, as so many were, by the great library and the great Mausoleum and the patronage of the early Ptolemy kings in the first generations of the city, around 300 years before the Common Era. And in Alexandria he did something that, in almost every other place and time of the ancient world, would have been forbidden, would have been thought a terrible thing, an offense against the gods and the dead. He studied the inside of the human body directly, by careful examination, and he learned from it more than anyone before him had ever known. It is a strange and a solemn thing to speak of, and I will speak of it gently, for it touches on matters of the dead, and the night is for rest, not for darkness. But it is part of the true history, and so I will tell it softly. In most of the ancient world, the human body was sacred even in death, and to open it, to look inside it, was unthinkable. And so the physicians of old, for all their wisdom, had only the dimmest idea of what lay beneath the skin. They reasoned, they guessed, they watched the sick and the wounded, They looked at the insides of animals, but the human body itself remained a closed and hidden country. In Alexandria, for a brief window of years, under the protection of the early kings, that ancient prohibition was set aside, and the physicians were permitted to look, and Herophilus looked, more carefully and more patiently than anyone, and he wrote down what he saw. And the world's knowledge of the body took a great quiet leap forward in those warm rooms by the harbor. What did he learn? He learned, first of all, about the brain and the nerves that run out from it. Before Herophilus, the wisest physicians, even the great Aristotle, had thought that the seat of the mind, the center of thought and feeling, lay in the heart. But Herophilus, looking carefully, traced the soft pale chords of the nerves and saw that they ran from the brain and the spinal cord out to every part of the body, and he understood that it was the brain and not the heart that was the true center of sensation and of movement, the true seat of the self. He distinguished the nerves that carry feeling from the nerves that carry motion. He studied the delicate structures deep within the brain and gave names to parts of it that we still use, in altered form, to this very day, more than 2,000 years later. A small fold deep within the back of the skull still carries, in the language of physicians, a name that means the wine press of Herophilus, given by him, kept ever since, a quiet small monument to a careful man who looked where no one had looked before. And he studied the pulse. He understood, as no one quite had before him, that the beating you can feel beneath the skin at the wrist, and the throat was the beating of the heart carried out through the arteries, and that by counting and feeling the pulse, its speed and its strength and its rhythm, a physician could learn a great deal about the state of the body and the nature of its sickness. He is said to have used a small water clock, a vessel that let water drip out at a steady rate, to measure the pulse against the passing of time, the first man, perhaps, ever to count the beating of the human heart against a clock. It is a small and a beautiful thing to imagine the careful physician in the warm room, his fingers light upon the patient's wrist, his eyes upon the slow dripping of the water clock, listening, in his own way, to the quiet inner rhythm of a living person, more than 2,000 years ago, by the harbor of Alexandria. We measure the pulse still, every doctor and every nurse in the world, and the small habit goes back, in a long unbroken chain, to that patient, watchful man and his dripping water clock in the city by the sea. What became of Herophilus in the end, we do not entirely know, and that, too, is part of the story of Alexandria, where so much was learned and so much was lost. His own books, all of them, are gone, vanished in the long, slow loss of the centuries, and we know him only at second hand, through what later writers said he had said, the way you might know a man only through the memories of those who once met him. But his careful looking outlived his books. The things he learned passed into the great river of medical knowledge and flowed down the centuries, and the pulse he counted is counted still, and the nerves he traced are traced still, and the brain he honored as the seat of the self is honored so to this day. Let us rest a moment on that quiet thought, the thought of knowledge that outlives the one who found it and the very books in which it was written, and then let us turn to the second of the great physicians of Alexandria, the rival and the near contemporary of Herophilus, a man with very different ideas, named Erasistratus. Erasistratus was born on the small Greek island of Chios in the warm Aegean Sea, and like Herophilus he came to Alexandria in those first bright generations of the city, drawn by the same patronage and the same freedom to study the body directly. And he was, by all the accounts that have come down to us, a man of a more restless and a more mechanical turn of mind than the patient Herophilus. Where Herophilus looked and described and named, Erasistratus wanted to know how the body worked, how it moved, how the parts fitted together and acted upon one another. As a craftsman wants to know the working of a machine, he thought of the body almost as a kind of wonderful engine, full of channels and chambers and bellows and pumps. And he tried to understand the flow of things through it, the movement of the breath and the blood, and the nourishment through their hidden vessels. He studied the heart with great care, and he understood, more clearly than anyone before him, that the heart was a kind of pump with chambers and with valves, the small one-way doors that let the blood pass in one direction and not the other. He saw how the valves of the heart opened and closed to keep the flow going always the one way, and this was a true and a remarkable insight, for the working of those valves is exactly as he saw it, and we understand them now in just the way he began to understand them then. He traced the great vessels, the arteries and the veins, branching and dividing and growing finer and finer as they reached out into the body, until they grew too fine, he thought, for the eye to follow, and in this too he was reaching toward a truth that would not be fully grasped for many centuries after him. He was not right about everything. No one in those days could have been, for the tools to see the smallest things did not yet exist, and would not exist for nearly 2,000 years. Erasistratus thought, as nearly everyone did until quite recent times, that the arteries in the living body carried not blood but air, a kind of vital spirit drawn in from the breath, and that blood filled them only after death. It was a wrong idea, but it was a careful and a reasoned wrong idea, built honestly from what he could see, and from the curious fact that a cut artery in a living creature seems to empty and hiss, and it took the patient work of many later centuries to correct it. We should not laugh at the old physicians for the things they got wrong. They were feeling their way forward in the dark, with their hands and their eyes and their slow, careful reason, into a country no one had ever mapped. And the wonder is not that they made mistakes, but that they saw as truly as they did, so very long ago. But there is a story told of Erasistratus that I should like to tell you now, for it is one of the most famous stories in all the long history of medicine, and it is a gentle and a human story, the kind of story that is good to hear in the quiet of the night, and it shows the other side of the physician, not the mechanic of the body, but the watcher of the human heart. Whether it is wholly true we cannot say, for it comes to us from later writers, and such stories grow in the telling. But it was told of Erasistratus, and it has been told ever since, and it is worth the telling once more. There was in those days a great king of the East, one of the heirs of Alexander, a powerful and an aging man, and he had a son, a young prince, the heir to all his kingdom. And the young prince fell ill. He grew pale and thin and listless. He would not eat, he would not rise from his bed. He wasted slowly away before the eyes of his frightened father, and no physician in all the kingdom could find what ailed him, nor name his sickness, nor halt his slow decline. The old king, in his fear and his grief, sent for the most famous physician of the age. And the physician who came, in the telling of the story, was Erasistratus. And Erasistratus did not, at first, examine the prince's body in the usual way. Instead, being a careful watcher, he sat quietly by the young man's bed, day after day, and watched and waited. And he noticed something. He noticed that at certain moments the prince's pulse would suddenly quicken, and his face would flush, and his breath would catch, and his whole body would betray a deep and secret agitation. And at other moments the pulse would be calm. And the careful physician began to watch when these changes came. And he saw that they came whenever a certain person entered the room. Not the prince's father, not his old nurse, but the young and beautiful wife of the old king himself, the prince's own stepmother. Whenever she came near, the prince's pulse leapt and raced, and his face flushed, and when she went away again, the pulse grew slow and the color faded. And Erasistratus understood. The prince was not dying of any disease of the body at all. He was dying of love, a hopeless, forbidden, secret love, for his own father's young wife, a love he could never speak of and never act upon, and which was slowly killing him from within. Now here was a terrible difficulty, for how could such a thing be told to the old king? And the story tells how Erasistratus, being a wise man as well as a careful one, found a gentle way through. He went to the old king and said, "Your son is sick with love, with a hopeless love for a woman he cannot have, for she is the wife of another man." And the old king, in his desperate grief, cried out at once, "If that is all, then I will command that man, whoever he is, to give up his wife to my son, that my son may live." And Erasistratus said softly, "But would you truly do so, if it were your own wife the boy loved?" And the old king, in the depth of his fear for his son, swore that he would give up anything, even his own young wife, if only the boy might live. And so the truth was told, and the old king, having sworn, kept his terrible word, and gave his young wife to his son, and the prince recovered and lived, and in time inherited the kingdom. It is a strange story, and a sad one, and a tender one, and it has been retold 1,000 times across the centuries, by poets and painters and physicians, for the sake of that one quiet image at the heart of it, the careful physician sitting by the sick bed, his fingers light upon the young man's wrist, reading in the racing of the pulse a secret of the heart that no examination of the body could ever have found. The pulse that Herophilus first counted against his water clock, Erasistratus used here to read the hidden sorrows of a living soul, and in that small image the whole gentle art of the physician seems to gather and shine. Let us leave the great physicians there, with that quiet image, and return now to the warm shop above the harbour, for we have left the apothecary's bench standing empty too long, and there is work upon it that we must come and watch. For in the very middle of the shop, you remember, stands the long compounding bench, worn smooth and pale by the years, and it is here that the apothecary did his slowest and his most careful work of all, the making of the great compound medicines, the famous antidotes against poison, the medicines made not of one thing, but of dozens of things, ground and weighed and mixed and matured over long months into a single dark, precious paste. And of all these great compound medicines, none was more famous, none more strange, none more long-lived than the one called theriac. and its older cousin, the medicine called Mithridatum. Let us draw near the bench and watch the slow work and hear the strange long story of the universal antidote. The story begins with a king, as so many of these stories do, a king who lived in fear of poison. His name was Mithridates, and he was the king of a land called Pontus, on the far southern shore of the Black Sea, and he lived a little more than 100 years before the Common Era, in the long age when the power of Rome was spreading out across the world and swallowing the older kingdoms one by one. Mithridates was a clever and a ruthless and a deeply suspicious man. And he had good reason for his suspicion, for his own father had been poisoned at a feast, and the courts of the eastern kings were full of poisoners, and a king who wished to keep his throne and his life had to fear the cup at every meal. And so Mithridates became obsessed, above all things, with the fear of poison and with the search for a defense against it. He set himself, the histories tell us, to make himself proof against every poison in the world. He studied poisons. He gathered around himself the most learned physicians and herbalists and poison gatherers of the East, and he made a long and a terrible study of every venom and every poisonous root and every deadly thing that grew or crept upon the earth. And he is said to have taken, every single day, a tiny measured dose of many poisons mixed together, increasing the dose by the smallest amount, so that his body might slowly grow accustomed to them and learn to bear them and become proof against them. And whether this truly works for some poisons in some small measure is a question physicians still argue over, but the king believed it and did it faithfully every day for the whole of his long and fearful life. And there is a dark and a fitting end to the story of Mithridates, which the old historians loved to tell. For in the end, after a long life of wars against Rome, the old king was defeated and betrayed and cornered at last in his own fortress by his own rebellious son, with no escape left to him. And rather than be taken alive by his enemies, the old king resolved to die by his own hand, and he reached, as he had so often imagined he might, for poison. But the poison would not work. His body, after a lifetime of small daily doses, had grown so proof against every venom that no poison could kill him, and he was forced, in the end, the story says, to ask a loyal soldier to run him through with a sword instead. The very defense he had built so carefully against death had taken from him, at the last, even the power to choose his own. There is a strange dark wisdom folded into that old tale, and the old apothecaries told it often by their lamps as they ground the herbs upon the bench. For Mithridates had not only dosed himself, he had also, the histories say, devised a recipe, a single compound medicine made of many dozens of ingredients all ground and mixed together, that he believed would protect against all poisons at once, a universal antidote. And this recipe, found among his papers after his death, was carried back to Rome in triumph, and it became famous throughout the whole Roman world under the name of Mithridatum, the medicine of Mithridates. And the physicians of Rome and of Alexandria took it up and studied it and added to it and refined it across the generations. The greatest of these refinements came a little later, in the days of the Roman emperors, from a physician named Andromachus, who served the Emperor Nero, and who took the old recipe of Mithridates and reworked it, and added to it, and gave it a new name, theriac, from an old Greek word that meant a remedy against the bites of wild and venomous beasts. And the chief thing, Andromachus added, the thing that made Theriac different from the older Mithridatum, was a strange and a startling thing. He added the flesh of the viper itself. He reasoned, in the way of the old healers, that the cure for the venom of the snake might be found within the body of the snake. That like might be made to drive out like, and so into the great antidote went the dried and prepared flesh of the very serpents whose bites it was meant to cure. And Theriac, with its viper's flesh and its opium and its dozens of herbs and spices and resins, became the most famous medicine in all the world, and remained so, astonishingly, for more than 1,000 years, ground and mixed and matured by apothecaries from Alexandria to Venice to Constantinople, prescribed by physicians, prized by kings, all the way down to quite recent centuries. So let us watch, now, the slow making of the Theriac upon the long bench, for it was the masterwork of the apothecary's art, the thing by which a great apothecary was known, and it was made slowly, and with great care and a kind of reverence. The recipe called for many dozens of ingredients, 60 or 70 or more, depending on which master's version was followed. There was the opium of the poppy, and the dried flesh of the viper, prepared with great care. There was cinnamon and cassia and cardamom and pepper and ginger and many other warming spices from the east. There was myrrh and frankincense and the precious balsam from the south. There was saffron, the costly golden threads gathered from the heart of the crocus flower. There were gentian and rhubarb and valerian, and a long roll call of roots and herbs and seeds, each one weighed out with the greatest care upon the small bronze scales, each one in its exact proportion. For the balance of the whole was thought to be the secret of its power, and all of these, the dozens upon dozens of ingredients, were ground, each in its turn, in the great stone mortar, slowly, patiently by the steady turning of the heavy pestle, until each was reduced to the finest powder, and then they were all gathered together and blended into a great quantity of the finest honey, warmed and clarified, until the whole had become a single thick, dark, fragrant paste, an electuary, the old word for a medicine made to be licked or eaten from a spoon. And then, the work only half done, the great dark paste was sealed into jars and set aside, in a cool dark place to mature. For the Theriac, the old masters insisted, could not be used at once. It had to ripen. It had to rest and settle and mature for long months, even for years, the way a great wine matures in the barrel, before all its many ingredients had married together and the medicine had come into its full power. Some masters said it should rest for a whole year before it was used, and some said longer still. And so, in the back rooms of the great apothecaries of Alexandria, there stood always, in the cool dark, the sealed jars of the slowly ripening Theriac, last year's batch and the year before's, waiting in the quiet dark for their long maturing to be complete. What did it actually do, this great and famous antidote, made with such care over so many months? The honest answer is that we cannot be sure it did very much at all against the poisons it was famed to cure, and yet it was surely not useless either, for it held within it real and powerful things. The opium within it would certainly ease pain, and bring a calm and quiet a cough, and settle a troubled gut. The warming spices would comfort a cold and aching body. The whole dark, fragrant spoonful, taken in fear and in faith, by the warm light of the lamp, from the hand of the trusted apothecary, surely brought a comfort to the frightened sick that we should not be too quick to dismiss. And whether it cured them or not, men believed in it utterly for more than 1,000 years. And there is a kind of wonder in that, in a single recipe, born of a frightened king's obsession, on the shore of the Black Sea, carried down through 50 generations of careful hands, ground always in the same slow way, matured always in the same patient dark, by the apothecaries of the long centuries. We will leave it there, the great dark jars maturing in the cool back room, and turn now to one of its quietest and most powerful ingredients, the one most fitting for this gentle hour of the night, the medicine of sleep itself, the poppy and its companions upon the shelf of the quieting draughts. There is, set a little apart from the others, in a place of its own, a small group of jars that the apothecary kept always within his own reach, and never let the apprentice touch unwatched. For the medicines within them were the most powerful, and the most dangerous, and the most precious of all the medicines that eased the suffering of the body. These were the quieting medicines, the medicines that dulled pain and brought sleep, and stilled the troubled mind. And the chief of them, the king of them, was the dried juice of the opium poppy. The poppy is a beautiful and an ancient plant, and it grows easily in the warm lands around the Mediterranean, a tall slender plant with soft blue-green leaves, and a single great flower at the top of each stem, the petals as soft and as fine as silk, in white and pink and a deep red purple, and when the petals fall, there is left behind a round green seed head, smooth and swelling, full of the small dark seeds. And it is from this green seed head, before it ripens, that the precious opium is gathered. The grower goes out into the poppy field in the cool of the early morning, and with a small sharp blade he scores a shallow cut across the surface of each green seed head, and from the cut there weeps a thick white milky sap, and over the course of the day this sap slowly hardens and darkens in the air into a sticky brown gum, and in the cool of the next morning the grower returns and scrapes the dark gum away and gathers it, and this dark gum, dried and pressed, is the opium. It is slow and patient work, as the gathering of the resins was slow and patient work, a whole field scored by hand, head by head, in the cool of the morning, for a small precious harvest of the dark gum. The power of the poppy was very old knowledge, older than Alexandria, older than Greece. The ancient peoples of the eastern Mediterranean had known it for thousands of years, and the old Egyptian papyri spoke of it, and the old Greek poems sang of a draught that took away all sorrow and all pain and all memory of grief, which many believe was the poppy mixed into wine. And the physicians of Alexandria knew its power and its danger, perhaps better than any before them, and they used it with great care. For a small dose of the opium, the apothecary knew, would ease even the gravest pain, the agony of a wound, the deep ache of a dying body, would soften the worst suffering into a bearable haze. A small dose would still a hard and tearing cough, and settle a griping pain in the gut, and bring a deep and merciful sleep to a body too racked with pain to rest. But a dose only a little too large would bring a sleep too deep, a sleep from which the sleeper did not wake, and so the apothecary measured the dark gum with the greatest care of all his measurings, by the steady light of his lamp, weighing the easing of suffering against the nearness of that final sleep. Beside the poppy stood the mandrake, a strange and a half magical plant, much wrapped in old story and old fear. The mandrake is a low plant of the dry Mediterranean lands, with broad dark leaves and small pale flowers, and a thick forked root that plunges deep into the earth. And it was the root that the apothecary wanted, for it too held a power to dull pain and bring sleep, though a rougher and a less certain power than the poppies. The forked root of the mandrake, the old people said, was shaped a little like a small human figure, with its 2 legs and its rough head, and a great web of strange tales had gathered around it across the centuries, tales of the root that screamed when it was pulled from the earth, tales that no man could safely dig it up. The apothecary, who dealt in the plain truth of the cupboard, knew better than to believe the wilder tales. But he handled the mandrake too with care, for it was a strong and an uncertain medicine, and he used it, in careful doses, to dull the pain of those who must endure some hard and dreadful thing, some setting of a broken bone, or some cutting of the surgeon's knife, to carry them, as far as he was able, into a merciful absence from their own suffering. And there was henbane too, another of the strange and powerful quieting plants, a coarse and clammy plant with dull yellow flowers veined in purple, and a heavy, unpleasant smell, that grew in the waste places and along the old walls, and that held in its leaves and its seeds a strong power to dull the senses and bring a heavy, troubled sleep. The apothecary used it with the same great care, for the easing of pain that would not yield to gentler things, and for the calming of a wild and a raving sickness, and for the dulling of the agony of those who must be cut or burned by the surgeon's hand. For there was, in the world of the ancient apothecary and the ancient surgeon, no easy and certain way to take away the pain of the body, as we have now. There was no deep and dreamless sleep that could be given safely and surely, as the modern physician gives it, before the knife. There was only the poppy, and the mandrake, and the henbane, the strong and dangerous quieting plants, measured out as carefully as a man could measure them, and given in wine. And there was a kind of sponge that the later healers learned to make, soaked in the juices of these plants and dried, and then moistened again, and held to the face of the sufferer, that the heavy vapors might carry him down into a deep enough sleep, that the worst might be endured. It was a rough and an uncertain mercy, balanced always on the knife edge between too little, which left the sufferer in agony, and too much, which carried him past all suffering forever. And the apothecary who kept these jars and measured these doses held in his careful hands a power over suffering and sleep and death itself that he never took lightly, and that he kept always within his own reach, by his own lamp, where no untrained hand could come. It is a fitting thing, perhaps, on this quiet night, to rest a moment with these gentle and dangerous medicines of sleep, and to be grateful, quietly, that the easing of pain and the bringing of sleep have grown so much safer and so much surer in the long centuries since. The Apothecary of Alexandria could only offer the poppy and the mandrake, measured by a careful hand and a steady eye and a kind of prayer. And yet within that careful measuring lay the whole long beginning of all the gentle medicine of rest that we have now, and the poppy upon his shelf is the far ancestor of every kind easing of pain that has come since. Let us close those careful jars now, gently, and turn to a different thing entirely, to the great book that gathered the whole of this cupboard into its pages and carried it down the centuries, the book of a soldier who became the keeper of all the herbs, the great work of Dioscorides. In the small inner room at the back of the shop, behind the soft hanging curtain, where the scribe sits at his low table copying out recipes by the light of the second lamp, there stands, on a shelf above the table, a row of scrolls, the apothecary's own small library, the written knowledge of his trade. And of all the scrolls upon that shelf, there is one that the apothecary values above all the others, one that he turns to again and again, one that is, in a sense, the very foundation of his whole working life. It is a great work in 5 long books, and it gathers in careful order the whole knowledge of the healing plants and the healing substances of the world. And it was written by a man named Pedanius Dioscorides, and the world has known it ever since, in the old Latin, as De Materia Medica, which means, simply, on the materials of medicine, the matter, the stuff, the substance of healing. Dioscorides lived in the 1st century of the Common Era, in the days of the early Roman emperors, a little after the time of Andromachus and his Theriac, and he was, by the most common account, a physician who travelled with the Roman armies, a soldier's doctor, who marched with the legions across the wide lands of the empire, and who used that wandering life, that endless marching from province to province, to do a thing no one had quite done before. Everywhere he went, he studied the plants. He gathered them, he watched them grow. He spoke with the local healers and the local herb gatherers and the local wise women. He learned the names the plants went by in every land. He saw with his own eyes how each one looked in its own soil, and he wrote it all down, carefully, plainly, without the wild tales and the old superstitions, only the plain useful truth of each plant, what it looked like, where it grew, how it was prepared, and what it was good for. And when he had gathered all of this, across all his years of marching and watching and asking, he set it down in his great work, some 600 plants and many other substances besides, the minerals and the animal products and the wines and the oils of medicine, each one described in its turn, in clear and careful and orderly words. It was not the first book of healing plants ever written, for the Greeks and the Egyptians had written such books before. But it was the fullest and the clearest and the most carefully ordered and the most honestly observed that the ancient world ever produced, and it had about it a quality of plain, reliable truthfulness that the working healers of the world recognized at once and trusted utterly. Here was no book of wild tales and magic. Here was a book a working apothecary could actually use, plant by plant, ailment by ailment, the distilled knowledge of a lifetime of careful looking. And so the apothecaries and the physicians of the whole Roman world took it up and copied it and used it, and it became almost at once the great standard work of its kind, the book against which all others were measured. And here is the wonderful thing, the thing that makes the work of Dioscorides so important to the long story of our shop and to the long story of all medicine. That book did not die with its author, nor with the city, nor with the empire that produced it. It went on. It was copied and copied and copied again, generation after generation, century after century, by the patient scribes of one age after another, in Greek and then in Arabic and then in Latin and in a dozen other tongues. All the way down the long centuries, for more than 1,500 years, the working herbals of medieval Europe were built upon it. the apothecaries of the Arab world built upon it. It was, quite simply, the foundation of the whole Western and Middle Eastern knowledge of medicinal plants from the time of the Roman emperors all the way down nearly to the modern age, when a medieval monk in a cold northern monastery copied out the virtues of a healing herb. He was very often copying, at the end of a long chain of copies stretching back across the centuries, the careful words that Dioscorides had first written down, watching the plant grow in some sunlit province of the Roman world 1,500 years before. And the copying carried more than words, for the great copies of Dioscorides were often beautifully illustrated, each plant painted carefully beside its description, that the reader might know the plant by sight as well as by name. The most famous of all these illustrated copies is one that was made long after the author's death, around the early years of the 6th century, in the great city of Constantinople, for a noble lady, a princess of the imperial house. It is a magnificent thing, a great book of painted plants, page after page of careful, lovely illustrations, each herb set out in color upon the page, and it has survived by some long chain of fortune and care, all the way down to our own day, more than 1,400 years. And it is one of the great treasures of the world, the oldest and the loveliest of all the copies of the great work. To turn its pages even now, even only in the mind, is to look at the very plants of the ancient cupboard, painted by a careful hand so very long ago, the same poppy and the same mallow and the same mandrake that stood upon the shelves of our shop, set down in color for the eyes of a princess, and surviving still, when the shop and the city and the princess and the painter are all long gone to dust. There is something in that, I think, worth resting on in the quiet of the night. A man marches with the armies, in a hard and a dangerous age, and in his spare hours he looks at the plants by the roadside, and asks the local people their names and their uses, and writes it all down, plainly and carefully, expecting nothing. And that quiet patient looking outlives the armies, and the emperors, and the empire itself, and the cities, and goes on, copied by hand after hand across 50 generations, painted for princesses, carried into new languages and new lands, the careful foundation of the healing of half the world for 1,500 years. The apothecary in our shop, turning to his trusted scroll by the light of his second lamp, did not know that he held in his hands a book that would outlive everything around him by 1,000 years and more. He only knew that it was reliable and useful and true, and that when he wished to know the virtue of a plant, he could trust what Dioscorides had written. And that trust, multiplied across thousands of working healers and thousands of years, is what carried the knowledge of the ancient cupboard safely down to us. So let us think now, for a while, about that great chain of copying itself, about the keeping and the carrying of written knowledge, for it is the very thread on which this whole long history hangs, and it is the thing that Alexandria, above all cities, was built to do. We have stepped, in our minds, into the small inner room of the scribe, with its low table and its single lamp and its shelf of scrolls. But beyond the shop, away across the city, stood the great original of which the scribe's little shelf was the faintest distant echo. The great library of Alexandria, the vast gathering of all the scrolls of the world, where hundreds of scribes worked at the slow, endless task of copying, where the catalogers labored to list, and order the countless rolls, where the scholars of the Moesian came to read and to study and to write. And the medicine of Alexandria, the great river of healing knowledge that flowed through our small shop, depended utterly on that vast, quiet machinery of copying and keeping, on the papyrus and the ink and the patient scribes, more even than it depended on the herbs themselves. For an herb, you must remember, is a perishable thing. The dried leaf in the jar will lose its virtue in a year or two and must be gathered fresh. The resin will harden and the oil will grow rancid. The cupboard must be renewed, always, from the living plants and the incoming ships. But the knowledge of the cupboard, the knowing of which plant heals which ailment, and in what dose, and prepared in what way, that knowledge is something else entirely. That knowledge can be lost in a single generation if no one writes it down, if a wise old healer dies before she has taught her apprentice, if a recipe lives only in one careful head, and that head is lost. Or that knowledge can be made almost immortal, carried safely down across 100 generations, if only it is written down and copied again and kept. And that, the writing and the copying and the keeping, was the great gift that Alexandria gave to the medicine of the world. The city by the harbor was, above all else, a great machine for the keeping of knowledge, and the herbs and the physicians and the apothecaries gathered there in part, because the knowledge of them was kept there, written and copied and stored as nowhere else on earth. Let me tell you of the papyrus itself, the very stuff on which it was all written, for it is a beautiful old craft, and Egypt was its home. The papyrus was a tall reed that grew thick in the marshes along the great river, a tall green stem topped with a soft feathery crown, and the Egyptians had learned, thousands of years before, how to turn it into a smooth pale surface to write upon. They cut the green stem into sections, and peeled away the outer rind, and cut the soft white inner pith into thin strips, and laid the strips side by side in a row, and then laid a second row of strips across the first, and pressed them and beat them gently, and the natural juices of the plant bound the strips together into a single smooth sheet, which was dried and smoothed and polished with a stone until it was a fine pale surface, ready for the reed pen and the black ink, and the sheets were passed at end to end into long rolls, and it was on such rolls, the patient gift of the river reeds, that the whole knowledge of the ancient world was written down, the poems and the histories and the philosophies and the careful healing books of the physicians. And the scribes who wrote upon them were a patient and a careful tribe. To copy out a long book by hand, letter by letter, word by word, scroll by scroll, was a labor of weeks and months, demanding a steady hand and a watchful eye and an endless patience, for a single careless slip could change a word, and a changed word in a healing recipe could be the difference between a medicine and a poison. The good scribe read and wrote and read again to check, and the great library kept whole armies of them at the work, copying the incoming books, correcting the old copies, making fair new editions of the great works of the past. It is to those nameless patient scribes, bent over their low tables in the lamplight, century after century, that we owe very nearly everything that has come down to us from the ancient world. Not the philosophers, not the kings, but the quiet copyists, who carried the words forward, hand to hand, down the long dark river of time. and among the great physicians who came to Alexandria to study. In the later centuries, to read in the great library and to learn from the long tradition of the city, was the most famous physician of all the ancient world, after Hippocrates himself, a man named Galen, who came from a city in Asia Minor and who studied for some years in Alexandria as a young man, learning his anatomy from the long Alexandrian tradition that Herophilus and Erasistratus had begun. And Galen went on to become the physician of emperors and to write so much and so influentially that his works became, like those of Dioscorides, a foundation of all the medicine that followed, carried down the same long chain of copying for more than 1,000 years. And Galen learned much of what he knew in the schools of Alexandria, drinking from the long, deep well of knowledge that the city had gathered and kept. So the city gave to medicine not only its herbs and its books, but its teachers and its students too, the living chain of physicians who learned there and carried what they learned out into the wider world and down into the later ages. But all of this keeping, all of this careful gathering and copying and teaching, this great machine for the immortality of knowledge, rested upon a fragile thing, upon papyrus and ink and the patient breath of mortal men, and fragile things do not last forever. And so we come, as we must, to the slow and sorrowful part of our long story, the slow loss of Alexandria, the fading of the great light by the harbour. Let us go out, now, to the harbour wall, in the cool of the evening, and look out at the lighthouse on the water, and speak of how a city loses its memory. It is full dusk now, out on the harbour wall, and the air has gone soft and cool with the coming of the night. The water of the great harbour lies almost still, the colour of dark wine, and the lights of the city are coming on one by one along the curve of the shore, small warm points of lamplight in the gathering blue. And far out across the water, on the long low spit of the island, the great lighthouse stands against the last pale light of the western sky, and from its summit, more than 100-man heights above the sea, the fire burns steady and bright, throwing its long slow gleam out across the darkening water toward the ships that are still feeling their way home in the dusk. Let us stand here a while and look at the lighthouse, for it was one of the true wonders of the ancient world, and it stood for a very long time, and its slow fate is, in a way, the fate of the whole city in small. The Greeks called it the Pharos, after the island it stood upon, and so famous did it become that its very name passed into many languages, as the word for a lighthouse itself. It was built in the first generations of the city under the early Ptolemy kings, around 300 years before the Common Era, in the same bright dawn of Alexandria that gave us Herophilus and the great library, and it was, for many centuries, very likely the tallest building anywhere in the world, a great tower of pale stone rising in 3 diminishing stages from a broad square base to an 8-sided middle to a round top where the fire burned, and where, the old accounts say, a great polished mirror of bronze caught the light of the fire by night and the light of the sun by day, and threw it far out across the sea, so that sailors could see it, men said, from very many miles away, long before they could see the low shore of Egypt itself. Imagine what it meant to the sailors coming in from the long voyages, from the spice ports of the Red Sea, from the grain harbors of the Western Mediterranean, from the far ports of the whole known world, For days they had seen nothing but the empty rolling sea. And then, one evening, far ahead on the dark horizon, a single point of fire, steady and high and unmistakable, the great lighthouse of Alexandria, telling them that the harbor was near, that the long voyage was nearly done, that the warm city with all its riches lay just beyond the gleam. It was a beacon and a wonder and a promise all at once. The steady fire on the tallest tower in the world, and our apothecary, on a quiet evening, might stand just here, on the harbor wall, as we are standing now, and look out at it, and feel, perhaps, that so long as that fire burned, the city, and all it held, and all it knew, would stand forever. But nothing stands forever, and this is the slow and gentle sorrow at the heart of our long story, and I will tell it softly, for it is a sorrow that the long centuries have worn smooth and gentle, the way the sea wears a sharp stone smooth across the years. The city did not fall all at once. There was no single dreadful day on which Alexandria died and all its knowledge perished. That is not how cities lose their memory. They lose it slowly, a little at a time, across long centuries, so slowly that no one living through it ever quite sees the whole of what is being lost. The way you do not see a great tree die in a single season, but only notice across many years that there are fewer leaves each spring than there were. The great library, that vast gathering of all the scrolls of the world, did not vanish in a single fire, whatever the dramatic old stories sometimes say. The truth, as best the careful historians can reconstruct it, is slower and sadder and more ordinary than any single great blaze. There were fires, it is true, across the long troubled centuries of the city's decline, accidents of war when the armies fought in the streets, and some of these surely destroyed great quantities of scrolls. There is an old account of a great fire in the harbor quarter during a war in the days of the Roman commander Julius Caesar, when ships were burned in the harbor and the flames spread to the buildings of the shore, and many scrolls, men said, were lost. But the library did not die in that fire, for it is spoken of in the writings of later generations as still standing, still in use, long afterward. No, the great loss was slower than any fire. It was the slow loss of the things that had kept the library alive. It was the slow fading of the patronage of kings as the wealthy and generous Ptolemies gave way to harder and poorer and more troubled times, and there was no longer the endless flow of royal silver to pay the armies of scribes and to buy the incoming books and to keep the great rolls copied and corrected and renewed. For papyrus, you remember, is a perishable thing. A scroll, however carefully kept, grows brittle and crumbles across the centuries, and unless it is copied afresh, again and again, generation after generation, it is slowly lost. Not to any fire, but simply to time, to the dry rot and the worm, and the crumbling of the old reed paper. And the great library lived only so long as the copying continued, only so long as there was wealth and will and peace enough to keep recopying the old, crumbling rolls onto fresh new ones. When the wealth failed, and the will failed, and the long peace gave way to the long centuries of war and trouble and decline, the copying slowed, and then it faltered, and then, here and there, it stopped, and the old scrolls, uncopied, crumbled quietly into dust upon their shelves, and no one made new ones, and the knowledge in them was lost, not in a blaze, but in a silence. And the scholars, too, slowly drifted away. The Mossian, that great gathering of the wisest minds of the age, lived only so long as there were kings to feed, and house and pay its scholars. And as the troubled centuries wore on, and the wealth failed, and the city grew dangerous and poor, the scholars left, one by one, and then in greater numbers, drifting away to other cities, to other patrons, carrying what they could of the old knowledge with them, but leaving the great house of learning slowly empty, its colonnades quiet, its common table no longer set. A great house of learning is a living thing, made of living people, and it dies as a living thing dies, slowly, as the people leave, as the rooms empty, as the long tradition of teacher and student, kept alive only by being passed from hand to hand, thins and frays and at last breaks. And around the slow fading of the library and the Mosean, the whole city itself was slowly failing. There were wars as the older order of the world broke down and the long troubled centuries came on. There were times of riot and of bloodshed in the streets, when the different peoples of the crowded city turned upon one another. For Alexandria was always a city of many peoples crowded close together, and in hard times that closeness turned to fear, and fear to violence. There were plagues that swept through the crowded quarters and emptied whole streets. There were earthquakes, more than once across the long centuries, that shook the city and cracked the great buildings, and one terrible series of earthquakes in the later ages at last brought down even the great lighthouse itself, the wonder that had stood so long, toppling its high stages into the harbour, so that in the end only the broad base remained. And then in time even that was gone, and its very stones were taken away and built into a fortress on the shore, where some of them, it is said, may stand to this day. And the sea itself, slowly, across the long centuries, changed the very shape of the harbour. The coast shifted, and the land sank a little gently across the ages, and parts of the old royal quarter of the city, the quarter where the palaces, and perhaps the great library itself had stood, slipped slowly beneath the waves, and lie there still, beneath the harbour water. The old streets and the fallen columns, and the broken statues, drowned and quiet in the green dark, where the divers of our own age have found them again, lying on the sea floor where they fell, the sunken memory of the bright city, sleeping beneath the slow water. So you see, there was no single end. There was only the long slow fading across many centuries, the failing of the patronage, and the drifting away of the scholars, and the crumbling of the uncopied scrolls, and the wars, and the plagues, and the earthquakes, and the slow sinking of the shore, all of it together, gentle and gradual and unstoppable, like the slow coming of a winter that no one quite notices until the leaves are all gone from the trees. And our small shop, with its shelves of jars and its careful bench and its little inner room of scrolls, faded slowly along with the city around it. We do not know its particular end, for it was only one small shop among many thousands, and no history records the closing of an apothecary's door. But we can imagine it, gently, as the natural close of our long evening. We can imagine the trade growing thinner, year by year, as the great ships came less often to the failing harbour, and the precious spices of the East grew scarcer and dearer, and at last almost impossible to find, and the resins of the South came no more, the long roads broken by the troubles of the age. We can imagine the apothecary, grown old now, the careful young man we first met grown into an old man with still hands, and a thin grey beard, finding it harder each year to keep his cupboard stocked, reaching for a jar of pepper and finding it empty, with no ship to fill it. We can imagine the great compound medicines no longer made, for who now could gather the 70 ingredients of the theriac, when half of them came from lands the broken roads no longer reached? We can imagine the apprentice not coming, in the end, for who would apprentice a son to a failing trade in a failing city? We can imagine the old man, at the last, working alone, by the one small lamp, with a thinning cupboard and an emptying street, in a city slowly forgetting what it had been. And we can imagine, at the very end, the door of the small shop closing for the last time, quietly, with no one to mark it, the low blue door swinging shut on the warm room, and the worn bench and the old jars, and the lamp going out, and the dust beginning slowly to gather on the shelves. One small closing, among 10,000 small closings, as a great city slowly forgot itself, and the long bright age of Alexandria sank gently into the long quiet of the past. It is a sad thing in its way, and yet I do not want to leave you in sadness, for the story does not truly end there, in the dust and the closing door. For though the shop closed and the city faded, and the great library crumbled into silence, the knowledge that had gathered there did not all die. Most of it, yes. So very much was lost, more than we can ever know or mourn. The countless scrolls that crumbled uncopied, the lost books of Herophilus, the forgotten recipes, the unrecorded wisdom of 10,000 careful healers, all of it gone into the long silence. And that is a real loss, and worth a moment's quiet grief. But not all. Some of it lived. Some of it was carried out, before the end, into other hands, in other lands, and kept alive, and handed on. And it is to that carrying on, that quiet survival, that we will turn at the last, so that we may end our long evening not in the dust of the closed shop, but in the light that was carried away from it, eastward, into the dawn of a new age. Let us turn, then, to the long survival, and to the patient hands that carried the old knowledge forward when Alexandria could keep it no longer. The light went eastward. That is the gentle truth at the heart of the survival, and it is a thing worth understanding slowly, for it is one of the great quiet wonders of the history of the world, and it is too little known. When the long Roman and Byzantine centuries of Alexandria's slow fading came at last to their close, a new power rose in the lands to the east and the south, a new faith and a new people, the people of Arabia, who came out of the desert in the 7th century of the Common Era, in the generations after the Prophet, and within a single astonishing lifetime spread their rule across a vast sweep of the world, from the borders of India in the east, across all of Persia and Mesopotamia, and Syria and Egypt, and the whole northern shore of Africa, and on across the narrow sea into Spain in the far west. And among the many lands that came under the rule of this new power was Egypt itself, and the old failing city of Alexandria, with whatever remained, by then, of its long memory. Now here is the thing that matters, the thing that is too little understood. The new rulers of this vast new world did not despise the old learning of the lands they had conquered. Quite the opposite. Once the first generations of conquest were past, and the new empire had settled into peace and wealth and stability, its rulers conceived a deep and a passionate hunger for the old knowledge of the ancient world, for the philosophy of the Greeks, and the mathematics and the astronomy, and, above all, for our story tonight, the medicine. The caliphs, the great rulers of the new empire, came to believe that the old Greek learning was a treasure beyond price, and they set out, deliberately and at enormous expense, to gather it, and to save it, and to carry it forward. And this great gathering and saving became one of the noblest undertakings in the whole history of human knowledge. The heart of it was in a new city, a great new capital that the new rulers built far to the east, on the banks of a great river in the land of Mesopotamia, the city of Baghdad. And in Baghdad, the caliphs founded a great house of learning that has come down to us under the name of the House of Wisdom, and it was, in its spirit and its purpose, a kind of distant heir of the old Mausoleum of Alexandria, a great gathering place of scholars, supported by the wealth of the rulers, devoted to the study and the saving of knowledge. And the chief work of the House of Wisdom, for several glorious generations, was translation, the patient, careful, immensely difficult work of carrying the old Greek books over into the Arabic tongue, that they might be saved and read and built upon by the scholars of the new age. It was the same great labor that the scribes of Alexandria had done, the carrying forward of knowledge by the patient work of the hand. But now it was harder still, for it was not merely copying, but translating, the carrying of a thought from one language into another, which is among the most delicate and difficult of all the works of the mind. To translate a book of medicine, the translator had to know both languages deeply, and to know the medicine itself well enough to understand exactly what the old Greek author had meant by each careful word. For a small mistake in translating the name of a plant or the measure of a dose could turn a healing recipe into a deadly one, just as a slip of the old scribe's pen could. And so the great translators of Baghdad were not mere clerks, but learned physicians and philosophers in their own right, men of vast and careful learning, and the greatest of them have come down to us by name and are honored still. The greatest of all of them, in the field of medicine, was a man named Hunayn ibn Ishaq, who lived in the 9th century of the Common Era, and who was, by every account, one of the most extraordinary scholars who has ever lived. He was a Christian of the old Eastern Church, who served the Muslim caliphs and the House of Wisdom, for the great work of translation rose above the divisions of faith, and gathered the learned of every people into one common labor. And Hunayn ibn Ishaq devoted his whole long life to the careful translation of the old Greek medical works into Arabic and into the older Eastern tongue of Syriac, and he translated, across his lifetime, an astonishing number of them, the works of Galen above all, and the works of Hippocrates, and of the greatest importance for our story tonight, the great work of Dioscorides, the De Materia Medica itself, the very book of the cupboard, the very scroll that our apothecary had turned to by the light of his second lamp. Think of what that means. The careful book of healing plants that the soldier physician had written down so very long ago, watching the herbs grow by the roadsides of the Roman world. The book that had been the foundation of our apothecary's whole working life. The book that had been copied by hand down the long centuries of the fading city did not die when Alexandria died. It was carried, by some chain of hands we can no longer trace, to the scholars of the New World, and there, in the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, the patient and careful Hunayn ibn Ishaq and the scholars of his circle took it up and read it, and understood it, and carried it over, plant by plant and word by careful word, into the Arabic tongue, so that it could live on, and be read, and be used by a whole new world of healers, in a whole new age. The cupboard of Alexandria was, in a sense, copied out anew, in a new language, in a new city far to the east, and so it survived the death of the city that had first gathered it. And the Arab and Persian physicians who inherited this great treasure of old Greek learning did not merely keep it. They built upon it and added to it and improved it, for the new empire reached even farther across the world than the old Roman one had, all the way to the borders of India and beyond. And the scholars of the new age had access to healing plants and healing knowledge that Dioscorides himself had never known, the medicine of Persia and of India and of the Far East, which they gathered and studied and added to the old Greek foundation, so that the great cupboard grew larger and richer than it had ever been in the days of Alexandria. They wrote great new works of medicine of their own, vast and careful and orderly, that gathered the whole inheritance of the ancient world together with all the new knowledge of their own age. The greatest of these was the work of a Persian physician we know by the name of Avicenna, who lived around the turn of the 11th century, and who wrote an immense and magnificent encyclopedia of all medicine, the great canon of medicine, that gathered the whole of the old Greek learning and the whole of the new Arabic learning into one vast and orderly and careful system. And the canon of Avicenna became, in its turn, exactly as the work of Dioscorides had been, the great standard work of medicine, not only in the Arab world, but, in time, all across Europe too, for many hundreds of years. And so the great cupboard of healing knowledge, gathered first in Alexandria, lived on and grew in the new cities of the Arab world. And those new cities had their own apothecaries, their own small warm shops full of jars, their own careful keepers of the cupboard, just as Alexandria had. In the great markets of Baghdad and of Damascus and of Cairo and of distant Cordoba in Spain, there stood the shops of the apothecaries, with their shelves of resins and their drawers of spices and their small precious jars of poppy and mandrake, the very same medicines, very often descended directly from the cupboard of Alexandria, ground and measured and compounded in very nearly the same careful old ways. The Arabic word for such a shop and for such a trade gave us, in the end, by a long road through the languages of Europe, some of our own words for these things, and the great compound medicines, the theriac itself, with its viper's flesh and its 70 ingredients, went on being made in those eastern shops, exactly as the apothecaries of Alexandria had made it, matured for long months in the cool dark, prized above all other medicines. The cupboard had moved, but the cupboard lived. The Arab apothecaries did more than keep the old trade. They made it, in some ways, into something cleaner and more careful and more orderly than it had ever been. They were great chemists, the scholars of that age, and they developed new and careful methods of preparing medicines, of distilling the precious oils and waters from the flowers and the herbs, of refining and purifying their substances, of recording exactly the weights and the measures of every ingredient. They wrote careful manuals of the apothecary's art that set out exactly how each medicine should be prepared and kept and given. And it is from the Arab world, in those centuries, that some of the very foundations of the careful, measured, orderly pharmacy of later ages came down to us. The careful waiting, the careful recording, the careful separation of the maker of medicines from the prescriber of them, so that the one might check the other. The trade of the apothecary, which had begun in the warm shops of Alexandria and the older cities still, came to its full careful maturity in the great cities of the Arab world, and from there, in time, it would pass on once more, westward this time, back into Europe. For the light, having gone eastward in the time of Alexandria's fall, came back westward again in the fullness of time. As the long centuries turned, and the troubled early ages of Europe slowly gave way to a new awakening of learning, the scholars of Europe grew hungry, in their turn, for the old knowledge that they had largely lost. The medicine and the philosophy and the science of the ancient world. And they found it, to their wonder, preserved and enlarged and carried safely down in the books of the Arab world, in the great translations and the great new works of Baghdad and Cairo and Cordoba. And so began a second great age of translation, the mirror of the first, in which the scholars of Europe, often working in the borderlands where the two worlds met, in Spain above all, where the Arab and the Christian worlds touched and overlapped, took up the great Arabic books, the works of Avicenna, and the Arabic Dioscorides, and the Arabic Galen, and carried them over, in their turn, into Latin, the language of learning in the Europe of that age. And so the great cupboard came home to Europe, the healing knowledge that had been gathered in Alexandria, and carried east into Arabic when Alexandria fell, and kept and enlarged in the great eastern cities for centuries, was carried west again, into Latin, and became once more the foundation of the medicine and the pharmacy of a new age, the medicine of medieval and then of Renaissance Europe, the medicine of the monastery infirmaries and the university medical schools and the apothecary shops of the European towns. And in those European apothecary shops, with their shelves of jars and their drawers of spices, their poppy and their mandrake, their theriac maturing in the cool dark, the long tradition of the cupboard went on unbroken, in a chain of careful hands that reached, link by link, all the way back across the centuries, and the languages and the fallen cities, all the way back to the warm shop above the harbour of Alexandria, where we began our evening, and from those European apothecary shops, in their turn, by a chain of further changes and refinements across the later centuries, the long careful tradition came down, at the very last, to the pharmacy, and the medicine of our own day, to the careful weighing, and the careful recording, and the careful keeping that we still trust when we are sick. The blue door of the little shop closed, long ago, in the dust of the failing city. But the light that had burned within it never quite went out. It was carried away in careful hands before the end eastward into the dawn, and kept alive through the long night, and carried home again at last. And it burns, faint and far and changed almost beyond knowing, in every careful cupboard of healing in the world to this very day. But before we bank the fire at last and lower the lamp, let us go back just once more into the warm room of the shop, as it stood in its long bright days, before the slow fading came, for there are shelves we hurried past on our way, and corners we did not look into, and I should not like to close the door on the little shop without showing you a few of them slowly in the quiet of the night. There is no hurry. The fire is still warm, and there is oil enough in the lamp for a good while yet, and the harbour water is lapping softly beyond the wall. And you may let your eyes close whenever they wish, and only listen as we look into a few more of the quiet corners of the cupboard. Let us look, first, at the low shelf beneath the bench, where the apothecary kept the things that were not herbs at all, the medicines that came from the earth itself, the minerals and the stones and the metals of healing. For the ancient cupboard was not only a cupboard of plants, it held the gifts of the dry land and the deep rock as well, and the apothecary knew their virtues as carefully as he knew the virtues of the herbs. There was a jar of the soft green stone they ground for the eyes, the malachite and the green copper minerals that the Egyptians had used for the troubles of the eyes since the most ancient days, ground fine and made into a salve. For the eyes of the people of Egypt suffered greatly in the dust and the glare, and the flies of the hot, dry land. And the healing of the eyes was one of the oldest and most honored of all the Egyptian medical arts. There was a jar of alum, the bitter white mineral salt, drying and binding, that the apothecary used to stop the bleeding of a small wound and to tighten and heal the loose and weeping places of the body. There was sulfur, the yellow mineral of the hot springs and the burning grounds, with its sharp, clean smell, used in the salves for the troubles of the skin, for the itch and the scab, and the slow stubborn sores. There was a little of the precious litharge and the white lead, used with great care in the cooling salves and the plasters, though the apothecary, even then, half suspected what we now know with certainty, that the metal of lead is a slow poison, and used it sparingly and with caution. And there was, in a small and a guarded place, a jar of the dried green mineral they used against the most stubborn troubles of the skin, and a jar of the red ochre and the yellow ochre, the colored earths, ground for the salves and the cosmetic preparations for the apothecary's trade, and the perfumer's trade and the painter's trade all overlapped in those old days, and the same colored earths that tinted a salve might tint a lady's face or a temple wall. The whole low shelf of the minerals had about it the dry, clean smell of stone and earth and salt, quite different from the green and resinous fragrances of the upper shelves, and the apothecary, reaching down to it, was reaching into the oldest medicine of all, the medicine of the earth itself, older even than the medicine of the plants. And let us look, now, at the strange small jars on the shelf beside the minerals, the jars of the animal medicines, for the ancient cupboard held these too, and some of them are strange to our ears, and some are tender, and all of them tell us something of how the old healers thought about the world. There was the dried flesh of the viper, of course, that we have already met, prepared with great care for the great theriac. There was a jar of the soft, clean wool grease, the lanolin that the shepherds skimmed from the unwashed wool of the sheep, soft and waxy and faintly yellow, that the apothecary worked into his most soothing salves, for it sank into the dry skin and softened it as nothing else could, and we use it in its way still. There was a little of the precious musk and the civet, the deep animal perfumes from far lands, used a tiny drop at a time in the costliest of the medicines and the perfumes. There was the burnt and powdered shell of certain sea creatures, ground fine, a chalky white powder, given for the sour and burning stomach, for the chalk would soothe the burning, as the chalky medicines of our own day still do. There was even, in some cupboards, A little of the strange dark substance the whales gave up to the sea, the ambergris, found floating on the waves or washed upon the shore, a waxy grey lump of a deep and a haunting fragrance, prized beyond almost anything, used in the rarest of the perfumes and the most precious of the cordial medicines for the failing heart. Some of the animal medicines, we must say honestly, did little good, and some rested on no more than the old belief that a creature's strength or a creature's nature might pass, somehow, into the one who took it, the belief that the flesh of the strong beast might lend strength, or the heart of the brave beast lend courage. These were not true, and the modern age has gently let them go, and we need not mourn them. But others held a real and a quiet virtue, the soft wool grease that softened the skin, the chalk that soothed the burning stomach, the honey and the beeswax that we have already honored, and all of them together, the true and the false alike, tell us of an old and a touching way of seeing the world, a way in which the whole of creation, the plants and the stones and the beasts and the very earth, was felt to be full of hidden virtues and hidden helps, set there, the old healers believed, for the healing of the troubles of mankind, if only the wise could learn to find them. It was a generous and a hopeful way of seeing the world, and there is something in it still worth keeping, even now, when we have learned so much more. Now let us turn back to the herbs for a little while, for there were many upon the shelves that we passed by in our first walk, and a few of them are worth a slow and a particular look. Let us look at the saffron first, for it was among the most precious of all the plant medicines, dearer even than the eastern spices, the costliest thing, weight for weight, in the whole long cupboard. The saffron is the dried stigma of a small autumn flowering crocus, a low purple flower that blooms in the cool of the autumn, and within each flower there are only 3 of the precious crimson threads, the 3 stigmas, and they must be gathered by hand, 1 flower at a time, in the cool of the early morning, and it takes many thousands of the small flowers, a whole wide field of them, to make a single small handful of the dried saffron. And so it was and is the most precious of all the spices, worth its weight in gold and more. And the apothecary kept his small store of it in the smallest and most guarded jar of all, and used it a few threads at a time. It gave a deep, warm, golden color and a rich, bitter fragrance to the precious medicines, and it was prized as a great strengthener of the failing heart, a great lifter of the heavy and sorrowful spirit, a warm, golden comfort given to those whose life force seemed to be ebbing low. And the apothecary set a few of the crimson threads into the cordial draughts for the grieving and the despairing and the slowly fading, and they say, even now, that a little saffron will lift a heavy heart, and the apothecaries of old believed it utterly. And let us look at the gentian, the great bitter root from the high mountains, that the apothecary kept in a wide jar near the wormwood, for it was, like the wormwood, one of the great bitter tonics, perhaps the most bitter root in the whole cupboard, and a small piece of it, chewed or steeped, would rouse a sluggish stomach and a failing appetite as almost nothing else could. And the rhubarb root, brought by the long roads from the Far East, dried and golden, the great gentle cleanser of the gut, that moved the slow and stubborn body and cleared the heaviness of a clogged digestion, prized so highly that it travelled the whole length of the spice roads alongside the pepper and the cinnamon. and the valerian root, with its strange, heavy, earthy smell, that the apothecary kept among the quieting medicines, for it calmed the troubled, and the anxious and the sleepless, a gentle and a safe calmer, unlike the dangerous poppy. That could be given freely to soothe a restless mind and ease a body towards sleep, and that is given still, to this very day, for the very same purpose, by the very same root. And we should not pass by, on our slow walk through the cupboard, the great clay jars and the sealed amphorae that stood along the cool back wall beneath the shelves, for these held the liquids of the apothecary's art, and they mattered nearly as much as the dried herbs themselves. For a dried herb, you must understand, was rarely given on its own. It was nearly always carried into the body in some liquid, dissolved or steeped or simmered, and the choice of the liquid was itself a careful part of the medicine. The chief of them was the wine, and the apothecary kept several kinds, a strong sweet wine and a light dry one and a rough sour everyday one, for wine was the great carrier of the old medicine, the thing in which the herbs were steeped to draw out their virtue, the thing in which the bitter draughts were softened, and the precious cordials were made. The strength of the wine drew out of the herb what plain water never could, the deep oily essences that only the spirit of the wine would dissolve. And so the medicated wines, the herbs steeped long in the good wine, were among the strongest and most valued preparations of the whole cupboard. Beside the wine stood the vinegar, the soured wine, sharp and clean and biting, which had its own healing virtues, cooling and cleansing and cutting, used to wash a wound, to make a cooling lotion for a fevered brow, to dissolve certain hard and stubborn things that the wine would not. And the apothecary made his famous medicated vinegars, the herbs and the roots steeped in the sharp, clean sourness, prized for the cleansing of the body and the warding off of the bad airs of the plague seasons. And there were the precious oils, the good olive oil above all, the great soft foundation of all the salves and the ointments and the soothing rubs, in which the apothecary steeped his fragrant herbs over the long, slow warmth of the sun, so that the oil drew into itself the fragrance and the virtue of the rose or the lily or the chamomile, and became a healing oil, a fragrant oil, an oil to soothe and to anoint and to soften the dry and the aching places of the body. And there were the simple waters, the clean, cool spring water and the rose water and the sweet, fragrant flower waters, distilled in the later and more careful ages from the petals of the rose and the orange and the many sweet flowers of the garden, soft and fragrant and gentle, for the bathing of sore eyes and the cooling of fevered skin and the sweetening of the breath and the soft perfuming of the gentlest medicines. The whole cool back wall, with its great jars of wine and vinegar and oil and fragrant water, was the wet half of the cupboard, the other half of the dry shelves above, and together they made the whole, the dry herb and the liquid that carried it, the leaf and the wine, the root and the water, married together by the careful hand of the apothecary into the finished medicine that he poured, at last, into the small cup of the waiting patient by the light of his lamp. And there were the gentle aromatic herbs of the Mediterranean garden, that the apothecary grew himself in the clay pots in the little walled yard behind the shop, so that he need not always buy them. There was the rosemary, with its fine needle leaves and its clean piney fragrance, for the memory and the spirits and the aching head. There was the sage, soft and grey-green and faintly bitter, the great healing herb whose very name, in the old tongue, meant to save or to heal, given for the sore throat and the troubled gut and 100 small complaints, so trusted that the old people asked how a man could die who had sage growing in his garden. There was the thyme, low and small-leaved and pungent, for the chest and the cough and the cleansing of wounds. There was the lavender, with its soft grey leaves and its spikes of pale purple flowers and its clean, sweet, calming fragrance. For the troubled head and the restless spirit and the soothing of the anxious heart. And the apothecary dried its flowers and slipped a small linen bag of them beneath the pillow of those who could not sleep, that the soft, sweet fragrance might ease them down into rest, the way, perhaps, a soft, sweet fragrance is easing you down toward rest even now. And there, growing in the largest pot in the corner of the little yard, where it could catch the morning sun, was the aloe, the strange, thick, fleshy plant of the dry lands, with its long, pointed leaves swollen full of a clear, cool gel that the apothecary broke open and spread upon the burns and the scalds and the sores, for the cool, clear gel within the leaf soothed and healed the burned skin as almost nothing else could. And we use it in its way, still the very same plant, the very same cool gel, for the very same small kitchen burns and summer scaldings. The aloe had come, long ago, from the dry lands to the south, and it grew willingly in the warm Egyptian sun. And the apothecary tended it carefully in its great clay pot, for it was one of the most useful and the most reached for of all his living plants, the kind greenkeeper of the burned and the sore. So you see how rich the cupboard was, how deep, how various. We have walked it slowly, shelf by shelf, the common herbs and the precious resins and the far eastern spices, the minerals from the earth and the strange animal medicines, the costly saffron and the bitter gentian and the calming valerian, the gentle garden herbs and the kind green aloe in the yard. And behind every single jar, you remember, lay a journey and a history and a long chain of careful hands. The pepper had crossed the ocean. The frankincense had crossed the desert. The saffron had been gathered flower by flower in the cool autumn dawn. The knowledge of every one of them had been gathered and written and copied and carried down the centuries by the patient, scribes, and the careful physicians, and the great book of Dioscorides, the whole vast world, its lands and its seas and its long ages, had poured itself, drop by drop and grain by grain, into these small clay jars on these few wooden shelves, in this one warm room, above the slow lapping harbour of the city by the sea. That is what an apothecary's shop truly was in the great days of Alexandria. Not just a place that sold medicines, a small warm gathering point of the whole wide world and the whole long history of human care and human knowledge held in a few dozen jars by the light of one small steady lamp. Let us sit a while now upon the worn bench by the door, in the warm quiet of the shop, and let us imagine, slowly, the rhythm of an ordinary day there, for we have spoken much of the great things, the famous physicians and the precious spices and the long history, and not yet of the small daily life of the place, the ordinary people who came in at the low blue door with their ordinary troubles, the slow turning of the apothecary's working day. And it is in those small ordinary things, perhaps, that the truest warmth of the old shop lies. The apothecary rose early, before the heat of the day came on, in the cool grey light of the Egyptian dawn, and the first thing he did, often, was to go out into the little walled yard and tend his plants, and to set the brazier going for the slow decoctions that must simmer for hours, and to open the shutters of the shop to let in the cool morning air before the heat came. And then, as the city woke around him, the people began to come. They came in at the low blue door, out of the bright morning street, into the cool, fragrant dimness of the shop, and they brought with them the small and the large troubles of their lives. And the apothecary, who knew most of them, for he had served the same quarter of the city for many years, greeted each one, and listened, and asked his careful questions, and reached for his jars. What troubles did they bring? The same troubles, in truth, that people have always brought to those who heal, the same troubles that fill the waiting rooms of the physicians of our own day. For the body of mankind has not greatly changed across the centuries, and the small sufferings of the flesh are very old. They came with the troubled stomach and the slow, uneasy digestion, and the apothecary reached for the fennel and the cumin and the mint. They came with the hard, dry cough of the dusty season, and he reached for the soft mallow and the warm honey and the soothing syrups. They came with the aching head and the heavy, sleepless night and the troubled, anxious heart, and he reached for the calming herbs, the valerian and the lavender, and spoke to them softly, for half of the apothecary's healing, then as now, lay in the listening and the kind word, and the calm, unhurried manner, in the sense the troubled soul received, on crossing that threshold, that here was someone who knew what to do, and was not afraid, and would help. They came with the small wounds and the cuts, and the burns of the working life, the fisherman's hand torn on the net, the cook's arm scalded at the fire, the child's knee scraped on the harbour stone, and the apothecary cleaned the wound, and spread the healing honey, and laid on the soothing salve of wax and oil and frankincense, and bound it carefully with clean linen. They came with the troubles of the eyes, so common in that dusty, glaring land, the sore and reddened and weeping eyes, and he made up the careful eye salves of the old Egyptian art. They came with the fevers that swept through the crowded quarters in the unhealthy seasons, and he gave the cooling draughts and the bitter tonics, and the careful nursing advice, and sat sometimes by the worst of them through the long night, for there was little else in that age that anyone could do. And the women came, with the troubles particular to women, the pains and the difficulties of their months and their childbearing, and these the apothecary treated with a special gentleness and a special discretion, for these were old and intimate matters, and much of the knowledge of them had been handed down, woman to woman, midwife to midwife, across the generations, older even than the written books. And the old came, the old men and the old women of the quarter, with the slow aches of the aging body, the stiff and painful joints, the failing strength, the heavy sleep that would not come, the slow cooling of the blood. And for these the apothecary had his warming salves, and his strengthening tonics, and his gentle calming draughts, and above all his patient company, and his kind unhurried ear, for the old, then as now, were often as much in need of being heard as of being healed. And the children came, carried in the arms of their frightened mothers, the small fevered children who would not settle, the children with the cough, or the colic, or the rash, or the worm. And for the children the apothecary kept his gentlest medicines, and his softest manner, the sweet honeyed syrups, and the mild warm waters of fennel and chamomile, and a small kind word and a gentle hand. For he knew, as every good healer knows, that the fear of the mother and the fear of the child were themselves a part of the sickness, and that a calm word and a confident manner could do nearly as much good as any draught from any jar. And all the while, as the people came and went through the long morning, the apothecary's apprentice worked at the bench, the boy or the young man who had come to learn the trade. And through that apprentice we may see, perhaps, how the whole long tradition was handed on, hand to hand, generation to generation, exactly as it had been handed on since the most ancient days. The apprentice swept the floor, and tended the brazier, and fetched the water, and ground the herbs in the great mortar, the slow, heavy, patient grinding that built the strength of his arm and taught the rhythm of the work. And as he ground, he watched, and he listened, and slowly, across the years, he learned. He learned the names of the herbs, and the look of them, and the smell of them, and which jar held which, and how much of each to take, and how to grind, and how to steep, and how to strain, and how to mix. He learned by doing, and by watching, and by the patient correction of the master, exactly as a trade has always been learned, and far more of what he learned was never written in any book at all, but lived only in the hands and the eyes and the memory, the feel of the right amount, the look of the properly ground powder, the knowing of when the decoction was done, the thousand small wordless skills that no scroll could ever hold, and that could only be passed from a living hand to a living hand. And this is a thing worth resting on in the quiet of the night, for it is the other half of the keeping of knowledge, the half we have not yet spoken of. We have spoken much of the written knowledge, the books and the scrolls, and the great work of Dioscorides, the knowledge that could be copied and carried and saved across the centuries by the patient scribes. But there was always this other knowledge too, the living knowledge, the knowledge of the hands, that lived only in people, and could only be passed from person to person, master to apprentice, in the doing of the work. And this living knowledge was, in its way, even more fragile than the written kind, for it could not be stored on a shelf, but lived only so long as the chain of living hands held unbroken, so long as each old master found a young apprentice to teach before he died. When Alexandria slowly failed, and the apprentices stopped coming, and the old masters worked alone and died with no one to teach, it was this living knowledge that was lost most completely, the wordless skill of the hands, the feel of the work, the thousand small things that were never written down because they could not be. The books of Dioscorides survived, but the living touch of the apothecary's hand, the wordless wisdom of the bench, that was lost utterly when the chain of hands broke and could only be slowly, painfully built up again hand by hand in the new shops of the new ages. So the apothecary's day turned slowly on through the heat of the noon, when the street grew quiet and the people kept indoors out of the burning sun, and the apothecary rested too, perhaps, in the cool dim shop, and ground his herbs, and tended his slow decoctions, and taught his apprentice. And then, as the worst of the heat passed, and the long golden afternoon came on, the people came again, and the work went on, until at last the sun sank low over the western water, and the great lighthouse was lit far out on its island, and the warm gold of the evening came in at the low blue door, and the last customers went home, and the apothecary closed his shutters, and banked his brazier, and trimmed his lamp, and sat at last alone in the quiet, fragrant shop at the close of the long day, with the slow lap of the harbour water coming over the wall, very much, perhaps, as we are sitting now, in the warm quiet, at the close of our own long evening. It was a good life, I think, the life of the apothecary in the great days of the city. A quiet life, and a useful one, and a kind one. He was no great physician, our apothecary, no Herophilus tracing the nerves, no Dioscorides marching with the legions and writing the great book. He was only a small man in a great city, a keeper of a small shop, a maker of medicines, a binder of wounds, a listener to troubles, a giver of small comforts to the ordinary people of his quarter, day after day, year after year, by the light of his one small lamp. And yet his small, useful, kindly life was, in its way, the truest heart of the whole great thing, the place where all the grand history, and all the precious cargo, and all the careful learning came down, at last, to its real purpose, the easing of an ordinary suffering, the binding of an ordinary wound, the comforting of an ordinary frightened soul, at the low blue door of a small shop above the harbour. The great physicians are remembered, and the great books survive, and the famous lighthouse is sung in all the histories. But it was in 10,000 small shops like this one, kept by 10,000 quiet, careful, kindly men and women, whose names we shall never know, that the real work of healing was actually done, day by ordinary day, across all the long, bright centuries of the city. And it is to them, the nameless, careful keepers of the cupboard, more than to any king or scholar, that I should like, quietly, to give the last warm thought of our long evening, before we bank the fire at last, and lower the lamp, and let the shop sink into the dark. There is one more thing I should like to show you, before the lamp burns low, and it is not a shelf or a jar at all, but the great living scene beyond the shop, the harbour itself, and the city around it, the great crossroads through which all the riches of the cupboard flowed. For we have spent the whole evening inside the warm small room, looking at the jars, and that is right, for the shop was our home tonight. But the shop did not float alone in the dark. It stood in a vast and a teeming and a wonderful city, and the city stood on the edge of the whole known world, and unless you have seen, just a little, the great scene beyond the blue door, you have not quite seen the shop. So let us go out once more, in the imagination, into the warm evening street, and walk down the short lane to the harbour, and stand on the quay, and look at the ships, and the people, and the slow turning of the great trade that fed our shelves. The harbour of Alexandria, in its great days, was one of the busiest places on the whole face of the earth, and it was a marvel to see. There were two great harbours, in truth, divided by a long stone causeway that ran out from the shore toward the island of the lighthouse, and into these two great sheltered basins came the ships of the whole world. There were the great heavy-grained ships, the largest vessels of the age, that carried the wheat of Egypt away across the sea to feed the distant cities, for Egypt was the great granary of the ancient world, and her wheat, grown in the rich black mud of the river's flooding, sailed out of this very harbour to feed millions of mouths in lands they would never see. And there were the trading ships of every shape and size, the round-bellied merchantmen with their single great square sails. That came in from every port of the Mediterranean, from Greece and from Italy, and from Syria and from the western lands, bringing the wine and the oil and the timber and the metals and the manufactured goods of half the world, and carrying away the wheat and the papyrus and the glass and the linen and the precious medicines of Egypt. And there were the smaller, stranger ships too, the vessels that had come the long way, up from the Red Sea ports along the coast, bearing the goods that had crossed the deserts and the Eastern Ocean, the frankincense and the myrrh of Arabia, the pepper and the cinnamon and the spikenard of distant India. These precious cargoes did not sail directly into the great Mediterranean harbour, for there was no water road from the Eastern Ocean to the Middle Sea, but came overland, the last stretch, by the camel caravans and the river barges, from the Red Sea coast across the desert and down the great river to the city, and so into the markets and the warehouses, and at last onto the shelves of shops like ours. And the harbour quay, where we are standing now, was the great meeting place of all of it, the grain going out, and the spices coming in, and the wine and the oil and the timber, and the linen flowing both ways, a vast, slow, ceaseless turning of the goods of the world, day after day, year after year, in the bright Egyptian sun. And the people, oh, the people of that harbour, the people of that city. Alexandria was, above all things, a city of many peoples, gathered from every land around the great sea and far beyond it, living all together, crowded close, in the teeming quarters of the city. There were the Greeks, who had founded the city and ruled it, and given it its language and its learning. There were the native Egyptians, the people of the old land, far more ancient than the Greeks, with their own old gods and their own old wisdom and their own old medicine, older than almost anything in the world. There were the Jews, who had a great and an ancient community in the city, with their own quarter and their own learning and their own traditions. There were the Syrians and the Arabs, and the men of the eastern lands, the merchants and the sailors who worked the long trade roads. There were people, in time, from as far away as India, brought by the great ships of the eastern trade, and people from the lands far up the great river to the south, from the dark green heart of Africa. All of them crowded together, in the bright, noisy, fragrant streets of the great city, speaking a dozen languages, worshipping 100 gods, and bringing with them, every one of them, their own old knowledge, their own old remedies, their own old ways of healing the troubles of the body. And this, in the end, was the deepest secret of the medicine of Alexandria, deeper even than the great library or the great physicians. It was that all of these healing traditions met there, in that one crowded city, and mingled and learned from one another. The Greek physician, with his careful theories of the 4 humours of the body, could learn from the Egyptian healer, whose people had practiced their old careful medicine for thousands of years before the Greeks ever came. The Egyptian could learn from the Greek. Both could learn from the Eastern merchants who brought the strange new drugs of India and Arabia, and from the Jewish scholars, and from the wise women and the midwives and the folk healers of every quarter. The city was a great slow mixing bowl of the healing knowledge of the whole world, and in that mixing, that meeting, that endless patient exchange of one tradition with another, something new was born, a medicine richer and deeper and broader than any single people could ever have made alone. That was the true genius of the place. Not just that it gathered knowledge, but that it gathered different knowledge from different peoples and let it meet and mingle and grow. You can see it even now, even in the small cupboard of our little shop. If you look, the natron and the eye salves and the careful art of preserving were the gift of the ancient Egyptians. The careful theories of the body and the four humours and the great tradition of the watching physician were the gift of the Greeks. The frankincense and the myrrh were the gift of the Arabs of the far south. The pepper and the cinnamon and the spikenard were the gift of the distant Indians. The careful written gathering and copying that saved it all was the gift of the library and the scribes. No single one of these peoples could have built that cupboard alone. It took all of them, meeting in the one crowded, fragrant city by the sea, each bringing what their own land and their own long tradition had taught them, and laying it down together on the same few wooden shelves. The apothecary's cupboard was the meeting of the world made small, the whole vast, various human family of healers across all their lands and languages and ages, gathered into a few dozen clay jars in one warm room. And there is a hope in that, I think, worth carrying with you down into sleep tonight. A quiet and a hopeful thought to set against the sorrow of the slow loss. For the great work of Alexandria, the gathering of the world's knowledge into one place, where it could meet and mingle and grow, was not really destroyed when the city fell. It was only interrupted and moved and taken up again elsewhere. The same great work was done again in Baghdad, in the House of Wisdom, where the knowledge of the Greeks met the knowledge of the Persians and the Indians and grew richer still. It was done again in Cordoba, in Spain, where the knowledge of the Arab world met the knowledge of Europe. It is being done, in its way, still, in every place where the learning of different peoples is gathered and honored and let to meet and mingle and grow. The blue door of the little shop closed long ago, but the great work it was a small part of, the patient gathering of all the world's care and all the world's knowledge into a common store, that work never stopped and never will. So long as there are careful, patient people who would rather gather knowledge than lose it, and would rather learn from one another than turn away. The lighthouse fell into the harbour, and its stones were carried off, and the great library crumbled into silence, and the wheat ships and the spice ships sailed no more. But the light they served, the slow, patient light of human knowledge and human care, was carried on in careful hands into the long centuries, and it is burning yet. So let us turn back now from the harbour and the ships and the great crowded city, and walk back up the short quiet lane, in the last of the evening light, to the low blue door of the small shop, and step inside one last time into the warm fragrant dimness, for the hour has grown late, and the lamp is burning low, and it is time, at last, to bank the fire and lower the light, and let the long evening come gently to its close. Before we lower the lamp, let us rest the mind a little longer, gently, on the slow turning of the apothecary's year, for the cupboard was not a thing made once and kept forever, but a living thing that had to be renewed, season by season, as the year turned. And there is a deep, quiet peace in the slow round of the gathering year that is good to think on as we drift toward sleep. The cupboard followed the seasons, as all old country things followed the seasons, for each herb had its own time, its own brief proper hour in the turning of the year when it must be gathered, and a wise apothecary kept the whole calendar of it in his head, the long slow round of the gathering year. In the cool green of the early spring, when the new shoots came up soft and tender, along the field edges and the river banks, the apothecary, or the herb gatherers who supplied him, went out in the cool of the morning to gather the young leaves of the spring herbs, the soft new mallow and the tender young nettle, and the first green shoots of the season, for these were at their best, the old wisdom held, when they were young and green and full of the rising sap of the spring. And as the spring turned to summer, and the herbs came into their flowering, the apothecary watched for the proper hour of each one. For many plants were held to be strongest in their virtue, just as they came into flower, when the whole force of the plant rose up into the blossom, and these must be gathered then. In that brief flowering window, the flowering tops of the heel-all, the purple spikes of the lavender, the small white flowers of the chamomile, the golden flowers of the many healing daisies of the meadow. The summer was the great gathering time, the busy time, when the long warm days were spent in the gathering and the drying, the herbs laid out on the wide screens in the warm shade, turned carefully, dried slowly, that they might keep their color and their fragrance and their virtue through the long year to come. And as the summer ripened into autumn, and the seeds came ripe upon the stems, the apothecary gathered the seeds, the fennel and the coriander, and the cumin and the poppy heads, gathered dry and rattling in the warm autumn sun. And then, as the autumn deepened, and the green of the year began to fade, and the plants drew their strength down out of the dying leaves and into the roots below the ground, the time came for the gathering of the roots, for a root, the old wisdom held, was strongest in the late autumn and the winter, when the plant had drawn all its force down into the dark earth to wait out the cold. And so in the late autumn the apothecary dug the roots, the gentian and the valerian and the mandrake and the angelica and the many other healing roots, washed the dark earth from them and sliced them and dried them slowly and stored them in the jars for the long winter and the year beyond. And in the deep of the winter, when little grew and the gathering rested, the apothecary turned to the slow indoor work, the grinding and the compounding and the making, the long slow labor of the great compound medicines that needed the quiet months to make and to mature, the theriac and the antidotes and the precious electuaries, ground slowly through the short dark days, set aside to ripen through the long cold nights. And then the wheel of the year turned round again, and the soft green of the new spring came once more along the field edges, and the gathering began again, as it had begun 1,000 times before, as it had begun since the most ancient days, the slow, patient, endless round of the gathering year, turning and turning, season into season, year into year, age into age. There is a great peace in that slow round, I think, a peace we have half forgotten in our own hurried age, and it is good to rest the mind on it as the night deepens. The apothecary did not hurry the year. He could not. The herbs came in their own time, and could be gathered only in their own time, and the medicines matured in their own time, and could not be hurried. His whole life turned on the slow, patient rhythm of the gathering year, and the slow, patient maturing of the medicines, and he learned, across the long years of his work, the deep old patience of all those who work with the slow living things of the earth, the patience of the farmer and the shepherd and the gardener and the keeper of the bees, the patience that knows that the good things cannot be hurried, that the herb must be waited for, and the medicine must be left to ripen, and the year must be let to turn at its own slow pace. It is a patience worth learning, even now, even in our hurried age. And there is no better hour to learn it than this quiet hour of the night, when there is nowhere to go and nothing to do and nothing to hurry for, and you may simply let the slow breath come and go, and let the body grow heavy and warm, and let the slow night turn at its own slow pace, like the slow turning of the gathering year. And sometimes, in the deep of the night, the apothecary's rest was broken, for the troubles of the body keep no hours, and a knock would come at the low blue door in the dark, and a frightened face would appear by lamplight. A husband come for a draught for his wife in her hard labour, a mother with a child burning with sudden fever, a man with a sudden griping agony in the gut, and the apothecary would rise from his bed in the small room above the shop and light his lamp and come down into the cold, fragrant dark of the shop and reach for his jars and do what he could in the small hours by the one small light for the suffering that had come knocking in the night. And then, the draught given, the child eased, the labouring woman helped. The frightened face sent home a little comforted. He would bank the small fire again, and climb again to his bed, and lie listening to the slow lap of the harbour water in the dark, and the soft far cry of the night watch on the quay, and the deep quiet of the sleeping city all around him, until sleep came again and carried him down. It is in those small dark hours, perhaps, that the true heart of the old apothecary shows most clearly the willingness to rise in the cold dark for the suffering of a stranger, the patient kindness that asked no great reward, only the quiet knowledge of a small good done, a small pain eased, a small fear comforted, in the long dark middle of the night. There were many thousands of such men and women across the long centuries of the city, and across all the cities and all the ages before and since, the quiet keepers of the cupboard, rising in the dark for the suffering that came knocking, doing what little could be done, and we know not one of their names, and they asked to be remembered by none. But the small goods they did, the pains they eased, and the fears they comforted, and the lives they sometimes saved in the dark small hours, those small goods are woven, somewhere, into the deep fabric of the world, and the world is gentler for them, even now, even though we have forgotten every name. Let us give them, as the lamp burns low, one last quiet thought of thanks, the nameless careful keepers of the cupboard, who rose in the dark for the suffering of strangers all down the long ages, and asked for nothing, and are forgotten, and whose small kindnesses live on in the world still, like a faint warmth in old stones long after the fire has gone out. And now the lamp is truly burning low, and the oil is nearly spent, and the hour has come at last to bring our long evening gently to its close. Let us bank the fire one last time, and lower the light, and stand a moment in the soft dimness of the old shop, and say our quiet farewell to it, and to the city, and to the long story we have walked through together, before we let it all drift softly away into the dark, and let the body sink, at last, into the deep and gentle sleep that has been coming over you, slowly, all the long evening through. We have come a long way together this evening, you and I, though we have never left the warm small room above the harbour. We came in at the low blue door in the gold of the dusk, with the great lighthouse just lit far out on the water, and we have walked slowly along all the shelves of the old cupboard and looked into all its quiet corners. We have held the bitter wormwood and the soft mallow, the golden frankincense and the dark bitter myrrh, the far-travelled pepper and the precious threads of saffron, the dangerous quieting poppy and the kind green aloe. We have stood by the great compounding bench and watched the slow making of the theriac, and we have sat in the little inner room with the scribe and his scrolls, and turned the pages of the great book of Dioscorides. We have met the careful physicians, Herophilus with his water clock and his counting of the pulse, and Erasistratus reading the secret of a young man's heart in the racing of his blood. We have walked out to the harbour wall and watched the lighthouse burn, and we have spoken softly of the slow, long fading of the great city, and of the careful hands that carried its knowledge away into the dawn, eastward, when it could keep it no longer, and home again at last across the centuries. And now the lamp is nearly out, and the long evening is done, and there is nothing left to do but to let it all go gently into the soft dark of sleep. So let the names drift away now. You were never asked to keep them. Let the frankincense and the myrrh drift away, and the pepper and the spikenard, and the names of the physicians and the kings, and the long road of the spice ships and the camel trains. Let them all drift softly away, like the last thin curl of smoke from a dying lamp, like the slow gleam of the far lighthouse moving out across the dark water, like the soft steam rising and vanishing from a warmed cup. You need to hold on to none of it. It will keep. The shop will keep, and the city, and the long story. They have kept for 2,000 years and more, and they will keep until another night, if ever you should wish to come back and walk the old shelves again. There is no hurry. There is nothing to remember. There is nothing left tonight to do at all, but to rest. The old apothecary, our quiet, kindly keeper of the cupboard, has banked his small fire now and drawn the last warmth of it together under the soft grey ash, where it will glow gently through the dark, low and warm and safe until the morning. He has lowered the wick of his lamp until the small flame sinks down to a soft dim glow, and then to a last small ember of light, and then he lets it go out gently, and the warm, fragrant darkness comes softly down over the old shop, over the shelves of jars and the worn-smooth bench and the little room of scrolls. And he stands a moment in the dark, the old man with the still hands, listening, as he has listened 1,000 nights, to the slow lap of the harbour water against the stone of the quay, just beyond the wall, and to the soft far cry of the night watch out on the dark quay, and to the deep quiet of the great sleeping city all around him, and to the small soft settling sounds of the old shop as it cools into the night. And then he turns and climbs the small stair to his bed and lies down and lets the long day go and sinks slowly into his own deep and peaceful sleep as the great lighthouse burns on, far out on the dark water, throwing its long slow gleam across the harbour, watching over the sleeping city and the sleeping shop and the sleeping apothecary, and over you too, wherever you are, through all the long quiet hours of the night. Let your eyes close now, if they have not closed already. Let the shoulders soften, and the jaw, and the brow. Let the breath come slow and deep and easy, in its own slow time, like the slow lap of the harbor water, in and out, and in and out. Let the body grow heavy and warm and quiet, sinking down, soft and slow, into the deep warm dark, the way the old city sank, so gently, into the long quiet of the past. There is nothing to do now. There is nowhere to be. There is no quiz and nothing to remember, and nothing at all that is asked of you. The lamp is out. The fire is banked. The shop is dark and warm and safe, and the harbor water is lapping softly beyond the wall, and the great far light is burning steady over the dark sea, and the whole long story is told, and you may let it all go now gently and rest. Sleep well, sleep deep, sleep long and easy and warm. The old shop will keep its long watch over you through the night, and the slow harbor water will keep its slow soft rhythm beneath the wall, and the great light will burn on, far out over the dark water, until the soft grey dawn comes at last, slowly over the sea, and gilds the masts of the moored ships, and touches the low blue door, and warms the old stone of the quiet quay. But that is a long way off yet, and there is no need to wait for it, and no need to think of it at all. For now there is only the warm dark, and the slow breath, and the soft lap of the water, and the long deep rest that is yours now to sink down into, as far and as deep and as long as you wish to go. Good night, rest now. Sleep, and let the long quiet of the old city hold you gently until the morning.